Hey, Hall H Show listeners, Aaron Nabus here, and it's the week of San Diego Comic-Con 2020, or rather, Comic-Con at Home. While this virtual version of the Comic-Con we know and love can never replace the real thing, I'm glad that Comic-Con International has decided to put on what hopes to be an awesome online event. Best of all, it's free. Of course, I'm going to miss the after parties, networking, the in-person interviews, seeing friends that I only get to see once a year, the rush of being nonstop busy from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. or later, 4 days in a row, losing 8 pounds, and walking over 40 miles trying to cover the event as both a fan and a content creator. But with the virtual Comic-Con at home, I won't run into a major problem that I have at the actual event, having to decide what panels to go to and missing a ton of good ones with a ton of regret. I don't have to worry about conflicting panels, sprinting from the Marriott to the convention center and back, all the while trying to juke left and right like Barry Sanders as I try to avoid other con attendees in an attempt to make a panel. It being free will also give the general public a taste of the high level of panels that CCI puts together. For this episode, we welcome back our good friend, Jason Lethert from HeroJournalism. It's been a while since Jason, my co-host Alex Benedicto, and myself have gotten together, so aside from the preview of Comic-Con at home, mainly about the panels, we spend some time catching up. And in the Thunder Round, you also find out about a popular 80s movie that both Jason and I have never watched. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I'm giving you a heads up that this one clocks in at almost 4 hours. So please enjoy, and I hope you have fun at Comic-Con at home. Fingers crossed for a glorious return of San Diego Comic-Con next year. Hey, fellow nerds and geeks, Aaron Nabus here, and thank you so much for tuning in to the Hall H Show podcast, the voice of independent creators. San Diego Comic-Con 2020, or rather, Comic-Con at Home, is just a few days away, and the three amigos are back for a preview episode. On tap, we have Alex Benedicto, co-host of the Hall H Show, and Jason Lethert from HeroJournalism. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Thanks so much for inviting me. It's always great to talk to you guys.
Yeah, definitely. What's everybody been doing during the quarantine?
Well, I've it's funny. It's given me a little bit more time to get some editing done and such, and so I've actually kind of used that a little bit to get some more work done on my channel and try to get out some more videos and do some maybe more longer format documentary style material. So in a way, in that respect, I guess I can't complain too much.
Looking forward to that. I mean, your videos are pretty awesome to watch, and you cover a lot of things that people normally wouldn't think about covering.
Mm-hmm. I try to find, they're all in genres that people are interested in, cover quite a bit, comic books, video game stuff, and a lot of crossover with stuff that you cover as well. But I do try to find little, hidden nuggets, especially in my work on historical stuff, the history of video games, comic books, genre material. I try to, find these little nuggets that people aren't aware of, or sometimes are aware of some little nuggets of information, but don't realize how it kind of correlates to everything else. So I did a documentary video recently on the video game Pong. I'm really interested in the early days of video games and how they, developed and evolved into the games that we know today. And so I had found a series of examples of mechanical Pong games, and one of them was a big hit, the Blip, the handheld game. I don't know if you ever heard of that. It was big when I was a kid, and But then when I kept finding other ones, I realized that no one's really looked at that as its own genre and kind of figured out where that fits in game and video game history or whatever. So even though it was a very familiar topic that Pong itself has been discussed quite a bit, I felt like I could add a new spin to what we know about it.
Cool. Alex, what have you been up to?
Wow. Not actually not too much. Just organizing my life, getting rid of some clutter, physically, mentally, just time to reflect and mostly doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Have you been watching Maria Kondo? Is that what it is?
No, I haven't seen her.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a time to reflect, especially with the protests going on and everybody going through the pandemic and the lockdown. I mean, for myself, being laid off. Luckily, I've had some small freelance projects here and there. I've started taking some online classes. Got to give a shout out to Russell Nolte. He's from Wannabe Press. He has this free class that he offers on thecompletecreative.com. And I took that class, and it's about writing a great novel. And if you can probably finish the class in a day if you really went for it. But I thought it was pretty insightful, and I think I might try writing a novel. We'll see. But I found it pretty useful, and he gives a lot of practical advice on how to structure and game plan so that you can write a novel efficiently. So I found it really insightful, and I'm also looking into user experience classes, and maybe I'll try to learn more about web design. So I think that's going to be something that I'm going to be tackling in the next month or two, while I'm sort of in this lockdown and waiting to see what happens if after the furlough, basically. So trying to keep busy, trying to stay creative.
Sounds like you are definitely staying productive, not just busy, but productive. You too, Alex. I've done a little bit of that, kind of like reorganizing and trying to, take a little time to get through. Like I started reorganizing my DVDs and my old video games and such, because everything is just stacked in huge piles or boxes in the corner of my room or whatever. So I'm like realizing this isn't really helpful to even own this stuff, because to find anything would take forever, and it'd be a big hassle to get through it. So I'm like, I want to at least kind of have things a little bit more organized so that stuff's accessible. Any
DVDs that you found that were like, I can't believe I have this, or I haven't watched this in such a long time?
Well, that's one of the reasons why I was doing it, was because I've got some videos coming up where I wanted to, talk a little bit about physical media. Like I had an idea for, I haven't really started on it, but for a video, DVDs I'm still glad I own in 2020. Even just DVDs, not Blu-rays, because just some fantastic special edition, collector's edition, or specific releases that were maybe we never thought we were going to get or had been waiting for a long time. Not just an average like a Tom Cruise movie or something, but rare TV shows and season box sets of old cartoons that I'd been trying to find bootlegs of, and finally a DVD set came out, and I realized, and I was doing another video on Fry's Electronics. I don't know if you've been to Fry's Electronics lately. Have you guys been down there?
I went there late last year, and it was like empty.
That's exactly it. My buddy Adrian, who you guys know, and he contributes to the HeroJournalism channel. We were getting together one night late last year, just like you, and he said, "I've got to be late because I've got to go to Fry's, unless you want to come with me." And I said, "Sure," because I've been wanting to go and kind of check it out with my camera and see, I'd seen another person on YouTube put out a video like, are they going out of business? And he's in Arizona. And so I thought, well, hey, why don't I go down and check out the fries here and get some footage? And yeah, I agree. It was not really a hot spot of commercial activity when we went there either, Alex.
Mm-hmm. Well, how long ago was this?
We went there in October.
Okay. I think I went around that same time.
Okay, it was probably like right at the end of October. I think they still had Halloween decorations up, so it was probably October.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, I drove by and I saw cars, so I don't know if they're still in business or what.
You know what? I saw a lot of cars too. Maybe the place is just so big that even with, some people there, it still feels sparse. But, I found some interesting things. I mean, just bad signs, places where there was empty shelves, say, or aisles where there was a lot of, kind of filler product like water bottles and paper, white paper, boxes of thousands of sheets of paper, whatever, stuff that doesn't seem like it, is like a thriving business model. And a big thing for me was it was a real stark reminder or visual representation rather of the fall of physical media, because that was a place where I would go all the time. And this is why I was, trying to get my DVDs in order, because I also wanted to have some available for this, because there was a time in the, probably late 2000s where that was the spot where I could go get my, more obscure cartoon DVDs. And I don't know if you remember their DVD section, but it was huge. It was like four. Yeah, it was like 4 complete aisles, double-sided on both aisles, just thousands of DVDs. And most of those aisles weren't like when you go to Target and they're facing, they're flat against the wall with the, front of the DVD facing you. It was more like book style, where you had to, just look at a shelf of hundreds of DVDs, and you had to cock your head sideways and read the spines. There were so many of them. And well, when my video comes out, you'll have to check it out, because as you could imagine, it's certainly a pale shadow of its former self, the DVD section.
Oh yeah. I remember when I went there was one cashier. That's it.
Oh really?
Yeah. Where there's probably like 20 to 30 on like a busy weekend.
There was 2 cashiers when we were there. Actually, there was one when we got there, but then another one had to open up. I think because of my buddy Adrian was having a problem. He had this weird thing where he was there to get something. We were each there to get something for ourselves, but then he also had, the reason why we had to go was because he had to pick something up for work. And when he tried to use his company card, they told him he couldn't buy more than 1 item on the card or something. It was really strange, and ended up into being like a 30-minute ordeal. I swear to God, it was like I was recording it the whole time, and I'm thinking, well, this is kind of probably why retail is failing. And the manager wouldn't come down and talk to him about it or whatever. It was. We'd never seen that before, where they called the manager on the phone. The manager said, "Just tell him I can't, or that he can't, and I'm not gonna come talk to him." Wow. Okay. Yeah. And it wasn't like he could be too busy, like you said, Alex. The store was not packed,
Oh yeah.
So now that we've had more time on our hands because of the quarantine, is there anything interesting that you've watched or read, or any kind of maybe new music that you've listened to lately? I guess we'll start with Jason.
Well, one thing that was great was the return of Rick and Morty, which I don't know how big of a fan you guys are, but I'm a really huge fan. And anytime I can get new episodes of that, I'm pretty thrilled. So it was great to see the show back. I hope that it's not too long of a delay for the next season. It feels like it went by really quickly. But that was one thing that was very cool. In fact, I found one episode. I don't know if you saw my video on it, but there was one episode that had this really weird throwaway joke about the pea-eating centipede. Have you heard of that before?
Mm-mm.
Okay, well, Rick and Morty are going on a road trip through space, and it's going to be a really long trip, and Rick doesn't want to make bathroom stops. So he suggests Morty eat this centipede that'll eat, or swallow the centipede that will eat his piece so that he doesn't have to drink. And of course Rick has this because he's an alcoholic. So, he's downing booze the whole time or whatever, and doesn't want to make his own bathroom break or whatever. So I just thought that was a really weird joke, but it reminds me of an old Twilight Zone episode that I saw. And so I ended up doing a video kind of analyzing what, because there's lots of weird, obscure sci-fi references in that show.
Right.
And so I don't think anyone else realized it or had mentioned it on YouTube or even the internet, that it related back to this episode or whatever. So that was fun to see.
Go ahead. I like irreverent humor, but I just find the show to be too obnoxious for me, I guess.
It can be. I think, it'll it's pretty much on the line already. And so some episodes will swing back and forth a little bit too nihilistic or something. I can see that, but there's so much good stuff in it that you can't really seem to find in other shows. Mm-hmm. A sophistication of satirical, commentary on sci-fi history, for example, that it's hard to find, especially with that in that comedy style. That to me really makes it worthwhile, even though I agree with you, maybe not as much as you, but that sometimes it does get into that territory.
What else have you been watching?
Well, one thing I've been, trying to do is catch up on some stuff because, especially because when I try to put my free time into the channel, I'm always losing ground on, TV shows and movies that I should be keeping up with. And so I tried to make a concerted effort to get caught up on the new Star Trek material. Mm-hmm. Have either of you guys watched any of the new series, Discovery or Picard?
I'm caught up, actually.
I got the first series, yeah.
What was that, Alex?
Oh, I got the first series of Discovery and first few episodes of Picard.
Cool. Okay, so I'm definitely behind both of you, but I am, I think, 2/3 the way through the first season of Discovery, and I've been holding off on Picard. I figured I probably don't have to. There's probably not any continuity really in it that relates to Discovery, is there? So, but I guess the guy inside me that wants to, do everything in order was thinking, well, I should probably assume that I might.
You're safe. You're safe.
Yeah.
You can watch both at the same time.
Okay, cool. Well, then I might start piggybacking back and forth so I can get caught up on Picard. I think they are working on a second season already. Is that right?
If they're not yet, they will be soon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's been good because Star Trek's a classic, and it really was bumming me out that I was so far behind on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised with Discovery. Actually, I wasn't sure what to expect, but so far, I mean, from what I've seen from the couple of seasons that's available, I was like, wow. I was impressed.
Yeah, I have to agree wholehearted. I was fairly aware of, the controversy and complaints about it. And I tried not to get too into it because I didn't want spoilers, but I obviously am always interested in those kinds of reactions. And a lot of the stuff that I had read about it did sound, not so good. And I still agree that it was dumb of them to not try and set it in continuity. I think that the original vision Brian Fuller had before he was kicked off the show, in the early stages of development, I think, he is a Star Trek veteran. He's written on several of the shows, and he's, one of the great genre writers in, modern television. He created the Hannibal series, for any listeners out there that aren't familiar with his name. Mm-hmm. And he had, I think, kind of like the perfect pitch for the fans. So when they deviated from that, it was disappointing to hear. However, once I started watching the show, I had a very similar reaction to you, Aaron. I was really surprised at how good it was. There's still a few things that, nag me, and it bugs me that they didn't set it in continuity and, take that fuller approach. But dramatically, there is a lot of great stuff in that show.
Yeah, I mean, there's also, I guess, Michelle Yeoh's character is going to have a spinoff as well, right? Supposedly.
I've heard that's in development. Yes.
Yeah, that'd be fun to watch too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And also, they're spinning up. Now, I don't think I've gotten to the Captain Pike episodes. I think I'm really close to it, but I don't think I'm there yet.
Yeah.
They're going to allegedly try and spin off. They've announced it, but it's not really an announcement as if it's moving forward. I think they're kind of gauging interest and trying to see if they got the funding for it. But a spin-off starring Pike called Brave New Worlds, which sounds like they were going to try to get a little bit more back to the original, Star Trek concept of, actually going to planets and exploring, finding, new aliens instead of just doing new stories with the Romulans and the Klingons and, the same people that we know.
Yeah, that's totally, I'm all for that too. And I mean, how cool is it that Gregory Peck's son is in it, right?
I did not know that.
Yeah, Ethan Peck, he plays Spock.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that he was Gregory Peck's son.
Grandson.
Oh, of course, that would make more sense. I actually dated Gregory Peck's niece for a little while.
What?
Yeah.
That's a whole other podcast.
I'm not trying to name drop or anything, but yeah, she lives here in San Diego, and her dad, Gregory Peck's brother, Donald Peck, this guy is totally fascinating. He's had a crazy life. He used to race Corvettes in the 60s or something. Mm-hmm. He was, his most memorable thing was he was an Imagineer at Disney World, or Disneyland rather, for a long time. The guy's got to be pretty smart to be one of their Imagineers. It's like rivals Industrial Light and Magic, basically.
Mm-hmm. Have you been reading anything that you want to share?
I've been also trying to catch up a little bit on comics, and one of the things that I was really excited to finally get around to finishing, I had started the first issue a long time ago, was the new Vision miniseries that came out a few years back.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah. You read it too as well?
I read most of it. I don't think I finished it yet.
Gotcha. Well, I was very interested in that because of the new Disney Plus series that's coming out, WandaVision, I think people are calling it,
right.
Scarlet Witch and Vision. I don't know what the official name is, but there's been talk that some of that is going to, that they used some bits of the miniseries. Obviously, if you've read the miniseries, you can tell there's a lot that they probably couldn't use because I'm not even sure if it's 100% in continuity, or it's certainly, some of it wouldn't gel with what they were doing in the MCU, but that they were, using some elements of that to inform the TV show. And so I thought, okay, before the WandaVision TV show comes out, that's definitely one thing I wanted to have under my belt.
Definitely. Yeah, growing up, Vision and Scarlet Witch were two of my favorite characters to read. Yeah,
I thought I remember when the early miniseries came out for them in the 80s. I started collecting at about 11 or 12 years old, and about 83 or 4. Mm-hmm. And I remember getting some of those. In fact, I think I just got some of them a couple of years ago. Got a few extra issues to complete one of those in the bargain bins, one of my local comic shops.
Oh, was that like when the Wizard was supposedly her father instead of Magneto?
Yeah. and a lot of work with the Grim Reaper character.
Right, I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember reading about them in the Kree Skrull War, and that whole when Vision was starting to have feelings for her and everything. Uh-huh. That was really good part of that arc.
Yeah, that was, and if that kind of stuff is interesting, I thought they did a really good, chapter adding to that. Now, this is quite a while ago, but when Kurt Busiek took over,
I have to laugh each time you say Kurt Busiek because of that story you shared before.
Oh. Alex, do you know what story he's talking about?
Oh yeah, that's why I got you that name plaque.
No, that was not at the same. That was not the same con.
Oh, okay.
That's just a coincidence. It was before that. I just saw him on the con floor, and he was sitting there at this booth, and it wasn't a big booth. It was a small press booth or something, and there was only like 2 or 3 people in line, and I'm like, oh my God, that's Kurt Busiek, and I'm like, oh, I don't have anything for him to sign, or wait, no, I do, I think. I ran to another. I didn't have anything to sign. I ran to another booth, bought some comics that I already own, some of those early Avengers when he took over right around 2000, and went up and got him to sign it. And I've always loved how much he, wrote stories that almost seemed like tailored just for me. That really hit the tones of the stuff I like, the little bits of obscure Marvel, history and continuity, and I just blurted out, man, I feel like you're making comics just for me or something goofy like that. And he looked up at me like, get away from me. I was so bummed out as I walked away from that. So it was just a coincidence that another year or two later after that, I was at a panel that he was at, and I went up to the panel afterwards, and I think he left already. I don't even think I got a chance to say hi to him on that. There were 2 or 3 other guys there, and I go, hey, and I pointed at Kurt's, can I get Kurt's placard? Because he had just left it there. And the other guy goes, sure, and he signed it himself and then gave it to me. So you can see that in a lot of my videos on my YouTube channel, and there's a signature on it, but my recollection is that's not Kurt Busiek's signature. Weird story, but that's what happens at cons, I guess.
Anything else been out reading?
I'm sure there's some other comic book stuff. I've been definitely going through some stuff that I had thought about that I need to have some more familiarization with for future videos that I'm working on the channel. Some stuff relating, like some 80s X-Men stuff with the Sentinels. I wanted to do another video talking about some X-Men villain history, and one specifically focusing on the Sentinels, which are a big favorite of mine. I think one of the legendary, clunky giant robots of genre fiction, but not too much. And I know there's something I'm forgetting off the top of my head.
Alex, how about you? What have you been watching or reading during this pandemic?
First couple of weeks was just all news. Just all news, but yeah.
Have you overdosed on that? I mean, the news is so bad lately. It's like kind of hard to keep up with
first
it.
2 weeks of the end of March, like mid-March to end of March was just all news, and after a while I was like, man, I don't need to read this anymore. So I did some Star Trek. I wanted to start from the original series, but I started off with Voyager and finished that.
And, no way! You finished the whole series of Voyager?
Yeah.
Did you need to go through the whole thing, or did you just pick up with whatever season you left off at years ago or something?
It's on Hulu, so I started from season 1 to season, was it 7? 7 seasons, yeah. So yeah, then I was going to do DS9, and then, I don't know, I guess from that first episode, I was like, I never really got into DS9, so I went back to Next Generation and started from there. So I'm just a few episodes into season 1 on Next Generation.
Well, just a quick shout out to Greg Imahara, who just passed away. Although it's not official canon or part of continuity, the Star Trek, that fan-made show that he was a part of.
Oh, Star Trek Continues.
Yeah, it was really well done. He played Sulu, so just a quick shout out to him.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
You know, I've been wanting to watch more of that. I've only caught a couple episodes of that, but I love the tone of what they did. And I mean, it's really unfortunate now. Of course, the guy who kind of led the production has been canceled due to some inappropriate behavior, which is always a bummer. But I'm still planning on going back and checking out those episodes, especially. I think in season 2 they got that David Gerald, original Star Trek writer, returning to do a sequel to one of his episodes, specifically, and they even have an actor returning from the original episode in the 60s or whatever. The guy's still alive. He's like in his 80s or whatever, and he reprised his role from Who Mourns for Adonis or whatever.
Right, I remember that one.
Yeah, great show.
Even had Lou Ferrigno on one of the episodes.
Oh, really? You know, I've only caught a couple, so I definitely hadn't seen that one. I wasn't aware of that. Hey, but let me just follow up with Alex on Voyager, because I love Voyager. I mean, I have a love-hate relationship with it because it vexes me for all the reasons that other people, complain and criticize about it. But I think it's one of the funnest, underrated shows, because there are definitely some absolute diamonds among that rough, and just some great episodes that I think you could put on par with, just about any Star Trek great episode from the other series.
Oh yeah, I like that series a lot for some reason, and there's like a lot of episodes that you could definitely relate today, from AI, issues, ethics, to social, economic, issues going on today.
Yeah, I think on the AI front, the stuff that they did with the Doctor and 7 of 9, were just some of the greatest stuff that the show did. I think there's some other episodes that are really awesome that maybe don't get as much attention. I think the Doctor and the 7 of 9 are probably two of the most popular characters, and they had so many episodes that featured them in the latter half of the series, but still did some great stuff and some great stories on AI. You're right. I mean, that's such a central part of the Star Trek mythos is really exploring, those paradigms and free will and AI rights and such, that I think, again, that those are episodes that can hang with Next Generation and the original series.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite episodes was had to do with probably like social class and Medicare, or medicine. How like a politician got preference to like someone who works in the mines and was working their ass off digging and stuff like that, where a politician who had probably like a pimple got
all the resources.
Yeah, preference to medical care compared to a miner who lung problems or something. But it was a cool episode. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, definitely some very underrated gems there. I think that's for some people a little bit tough of a series to get through, because admittedly that first season to me was a bit of a slog. It's like the new villains that they introduced, and I forget what they're called right now, but the Kazon, I think they are. They were not as cool as the new villains that were introduced in previous shows. They just weren't like a Klingon level or Borg level, kind of nemesis, at least as far as interesting and character design and stuff. There's still some interesting theories behind the show, but once the series gets rolling, even though it still has plenty of clunkers in it, you really start stumbling across some real gems that deserve, I think, to be recognized in Star Trek history.
Yeah, I agree.
Anything else?
There's just a couple other shows that I have in the queue, just that I kind of stopped mid season or whatever. Like some of the, Walking Dead. I haven't seen the last full episode or season, And Fear the Walking Dead too. I kind of stopped a few seasons ago, so I got to catch up on some more new recent TV shows.
That's one that got away from me because there were just so many. I just once I took a little break or whatever, they just started churning out seasons, and I'm like, and a lot of people were complaining about the show starting to have the law of diminishing returns. So it kind of made me think, even though I thought the show was pretty good, it's kind of delayed me from getting back and trying to catch up again.
Yeah. That's about it for me.
Any comic books that you've been reading?
The only recent one I read was Planet Hulk.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Cool.
So, yeah. It was on. I guess I got it suggested by Amazon Prime Reading.
Oh, really?
It was a suggestion, yeah. So I said, hey, why not? So, yeah. And the other ones, I haven't been reading too much. I just kind of been like organizing stuff because getting stuff from different events. I kind of just throw it in on a shelf. I finally kind of put them together, separated them, and got them ready to read. So
that must have been a lot of work because in the last few years we've been to quite a few events.
Yeah, and even there's even some that should be coming soon from Kickstarter too.
Yeah, I just got one from Kickstarter. I think one from David Walker.
Okay, which one?
No, the Hated, I think.
Oh, the Hated. Oh, yeah. I didn't get that one. Okay, cool.
Awesome.
Let me just a quick. You'd asked anything else you were reading. It's funny, I didn't think about this until Alex said that he had it suggested to him on Amazon. I'm like, oh yeah, Amazon and Kindle, and I guess if I consider that, or even books, it's I haven't been reading much fiction, but I do have a stack of stuff I've been going through that's nonfiction, but that's mainly, I didn't really consider that reading when you asked, because you think about, reading literature or whatever, and instead I've been reading history books on, some a lot of video game history stuff lately. Also, I picked up some books on Alan Moore. Thought that might pique your interest, because I have a couple videos that I want to do on Alan Moore and his comic books, and also specifically his relationship with Hollywood, which I'm sure you've heard a few things about.
Oh, like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and all that stuff?
Yep. Well, now it's everything. He's
right.
Just completely anti-Hollywood.
Oh, I see. Got it.
But, and he has good reasons. Some of them are good reasons. I think some of his reasons are nonsensical, which is why I think it's kind of an interesting topic to talk about. I mean, he's one of the most brilliant writers of our time, and certainly one of the most important comic book writers of all time. And I think that it's very common for people. Human beings have a difficult time with nuance. So when you have someone that you exalt and respect, it's difficult sometimes to, be critical to that person. And so while I, worship at the altar of Alan Moore, as many people do, I'm not afraid to, kind of poke some holes through his, some of his arguments or some of his approaches or some of the things he said or whatever. So I think there's some interesting tension there between the fact that doesn't mean I, won't try to read everything that he comes out with. I mean, I've got every League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, if not in the comics, a reprint. Every volume I'm totally interested in checking out to see where he takes that, and a lot of his series. Generally, I'm almost like not quite a completionist. I'm not trying to definitely read everything he does, but fairly close. I'm always interested in what he does.
That's good on you for being a proponent, for having that ability to set aside your fanboy and put on your sort of historian goggles.
Yeah, I think it's a really prevalent issue or problem, because, you know, especially as cancel culture becomes a big thing these days, you know, again, it's possible. I mean, you know, there's a spectrum of what, you know, people have done to have cancel culture thrown at them. And, you know, obviously, you know, in the, you know, with not the dire stuff, I think we all agree that we are canceling Bill Cosby, for example. But for people who just have, you know, done minor things or stuff, I think it's important to recognize. I mean, it's part of realizing we're all human and we all have things about us that are good or bad, and that, you know, one doesn't necessarily cancel out the other.
It's a good point. And that's definitely something that's, you know, could be discussed as another podcast for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to.
As for me, what I've been sort of watching the last few weeks and months, I've been catching up on shows like Dark. It's a German show on Netflix show. Deals with time travel and space travel also. But it was pretty. It's really original, and it's something that I got sucked into, and it just finished its third season. So I thought it was pretty good. Hour
long drama, I take it.
Yeah.
And how many episodes per season?
I would say at least 10. Gotcha.
Cool. I'll have to check that out. Look for that. And
yeah, I mean, it can get kind of convoluted. So there's fan sites out there that help sort of keep track of everything. But, you know, it might be in the beginning. I wouldn't recommend doing that because you may learn something that you shouldn't learn until later. You know what I mean? But for sure, you know, having a piece of paper and writing down the characters and sort of drawing through lines might help you keep track of everything. Because even though it gets convoluted, it's still a fun watch, and I enjoyed it.
That sounds very cool.
Yeah, there's a show called on DC Universe called Doom Patrol.
Oh, love that!
It's so good. I was like, wow, this is. I've never read the comic book, so I wasn't sure what to expect. So, but it's really well acted and it's well written, and it, you know, of course, it features my favorite James Bond, you know, Timothy Dalton. So, I totally love the show, and it's really edgy, but at the same time, it's not like pretentious, you know?
Yeah. No, I think they hit it out of the park with that. Have they come out with the second season yet?
Yeah, it's streaming right now.
Okay, I haven't started with the second season yet, so I can't speak on that. But yeah, that first season was amazing. I mean, I'm like, holy crap! This is what they should be doing with comic book properties. This is perfect, and they were able to do it, I think, partially because it was this small, quirky, weird property that, you know, it wasn't like Superman. So the, you know, Warner Brothers was like, okay, well, maybe actually let the creative people run the show this time, because, you know, the characterizations, the drama that they pack into that is just so tight and so meaningful, so much more depth than, you know, most of this type of spectacle entertainment. I just thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. And believe it or not, I've never watched Star Wars Clone Wars, so I'm starting.
The cartoon?
I'm starting over from the beginning. So, and so far I'm enjoying it. Like, I'm a huge fan of Star Wars Rebels. I don't know if any of you have watched it.
A little bit.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think I've come to the conclusion that I think all Star Wars should be animated. So.
You know, one thing that gets me is I wish they would do a Star Wars that's traditional cell animation.
Oh, I see.
Because I have a little bit harder time with the computer animation. It just doesn't excite me as much as traditional cell animation.
I can see that, but I'm sort of coming at it from a consistency of the story sort of aspect. You know, they have more control over everything, so there's more cohesiveness to the narrative. So, and I think that's one thing that's missing from the live action adaptations or the movies.
Oh, I agree wholeheartedly. And I've been, I didn't watch the entire Clone Wars series, but that's another thing that I've been, saying to myself. I want to go back and rewatch all those in order, because even regardless of it in the merits of an animation show, as the merits of it as a Star Wars show, there's definitely some good drama and good stories in there that are really, feel like Star Wars canon.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah.
I've also been watching a ton of YouTube videos. I mean, I've come across, random things like, I don't know how I got to it, but I started watching all these skateboarding videos. So I've been hooked on this guy named Johnny Geiger. I think he's based out of Switzerland, but he's a professional skateboarder. But I've been watching all his skateboarding videos, and he has this series of trying to do all of Rodney Mullen's skateboarding tricks. And Rodney Mullen was part of the Bones Brigade, sort of like the era of Tony Hawk. But he sort of invented all these tricks that modern day street skaters do today. So it's pretty interesting.
Cool.
And I'm not a skateboarder at all, so I didn't know anything, but I just got hooked on it. I mean, I kind of want to go buy a skateboard, but at the same time, I'm kind of scared because I don't want to break anything.
Right.
And I've been reading. I finally got caught up with Descender by Jeff Lemire and Dustin Nguyen. It's really good. I recommend that series to anybody. And then I started reading the sequel, Ascender.
Ascender.
Yeah, so it's really good so far. I'm looking forward to the subsequent issues. And yeah, that's pretty much it. There's a whole slew of other things that we could probably get into, but it's already been 40 minutes and we haven't talked about Comic-Con yet. So pretty much before we get into the panels and the exhibitors and whatever else, I sort of want to get into what the San Diego Comic-Con mean to each of you, and basically, what is not physically being there, how does that make you feel?
Well, I'll start if that's okay. It's a real bummer for me because the in-person experience was so critical to what I love about it. Seeing it take over downtown San Diego, the buildings just, the restaurants, the streets just become an extension of Comic-Con. It's such a, unique experience that if you're a fan of this genre material, it's just something that you can't get necessarily just watching a video, I guess. And seeing the pros in person, being able to actually, talk to, and back in the old days, I guess, or pre days of this current situation, you could, shake someone's hand and and stuff. That's definitely a real disappointment, a real loss for me personally that I feel. And I actually just put out a video this morning, which reflects on this exactly. Since the in-person element of Comic-Con is canceled this year, I went back into my footage and I've been pulling out some footage of in-person experiences that you could only get at Comic-Con from being there. And this morning's video was on the Watchmen exhibit that they had to promote the then upcoming HBO TV series. And I don't know if you guys had seen their exhibit at Comic-Con last year.
No.
Well, basically, if you guys have both seen the movie, right, or read the comics as well, I'm sure probably.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Dr. Manhattan becomes Dr. Manhattan when he's stuck inside that in what they call an intrinsic field test chamber. And so they had an intrinsic field test chamber at the south end of Qualcomm, and people were in line. I got some footage of it, and you go into the test chamber, and then when you go in there, it was a video thing. So they, you're in the test chamber just like John Osterman was, and you're on camera and it's recording video of you, and it basically, you're standing behind or in front of a blue screen, and it basically does a CGI explosion, ripping apart your skin, your flesh, eventually your bones, and then reconstituting you as Dr. Manhattan, just like it did in the movie and in the comic book. And it's like those kinds of exhibits that they would have at Comic-Con were, to me, such a big part of the experience that really kind of let you, live in the movie or experience the movie or the TV show or the comic book or whatever it is, for even if it's just for a moment. And then, of course, you can take that video or you claim it on online code or something. I myself didn't actually have time to do it. But again, my buddy Adrian Telamentis, he did do it. So I've got video of both the intrinsic field test chamber as well as showing what happens when you actually got to go inside it. So that's the stuff that I really miss.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of Watchmen, I mean, I don't know if everybody's watched the series.
That's one that I still need to finish.
Okay. All right.
I think I'm like 8 episodes in. I don't know how many episodes. I'm about 2/3 the way through it.
I haven't started yet.
Okay, cool. Well,
it was good though. I mean, I thought, and I know where the complaints, and I can kind of understand some of them. Not really though, because I think that, first of all, a lot of people were saying you shouldn't even make any more Watchmen, and that goes back to Alan Moore's, feud and hatred of Hollywood. A lot of the fans automatically say, yeah, that's right, you shouldn't do it. And so even say, well, yeah, because the creator said so, you shouldn't do it. And I do not agree in that. I do not subscribe to that theory of thought. I mean, we've had Sherlock Holmes adaptations for 100 years after Sir Arthur Conan Doyle died. So, that's just the nature of the medium, especially comic books in general. It's the medium is built off of people creating characters and then other people taking those characters in new directions. So I was excited for the show from the get-go, but it definitely went in a different direction than I would have. But I mean, they did, again, such real interesting use of the themes of the original to try and tell a new story, and a story that's more relevant to today. And I'm sure that's part of what you were alluding to there, right, Aaron, before you pulled back a little bit, because neither of us had finished it. He hasn't started it. But I know what you're talking about. I mean, there are some just incredibly relevant things to, authority and force. And of course, a lot of people say that's, not the original Watchmen. But again, it's relevant today, and it does go back to the themes of Watchmen. I mean, the name Watchmen, who watches the Watchmen, is a commentary on, authority and hero versus fascism types of arguments. So people may not like it, but I think that it really does feel like a Watchmen story.
Yeah, it's definitely relevant to what's going on today.
Mm-hmm.
Alex, what does San Diego Comic-Con mean to you, and what are you going to miss this year?
Yeah, just almost like Jason, just that in person, like just camaraderie. It's like you get over 100,000 people together, and feels like all of them are your friends. It's so easy to talk to people and make new friends and see friends you haven't seen in a while.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I agree. I mean, it's even more sort of like magnified now that we're on lockdown and we can't be in physical contact with each other.
It's such a strange experience for, it's like, I think a lot of people aren't realizing until now, or are just suddenly realizing what social animals we are, that it didn't really, it didn't really register with a lot of people until that was taken away from us.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And, we'll sort of segue into some of my favorite Comic-Con memories, but, for me, going as a fan and, covering the event as a blogger and podcaster, working a booth, and then even being a panelist, it's like I had all these experiences, and it's like what both Jason and Alex have alluded to. It's really also just the networking aspect. Getting to see people that we only see once a year that we've gotten to know and we become friends with. And wow, and you're all there celebrating our nerdiness. So it's such a a big part. It's been such a big part of our lives for the last, couple dozen years, or at least a few years, right? I mean, decades, yeah. So I mean, even more now, since we've been covering it as covering the media and as journalists, basically. So we're seeing it from a whole new perspective rather than just being fans.
Yeah.
Let's maybe go into some of our favorite memories before we go into Comic-Con at home. Jason.
Well, one of my favorite memories was the Blade Runner experience. It was one of the first videos that I put out. It was the first year I had started my channel, so that must have been Comic-Con 2017. And, it was really cool that I just started, working on developing the channel. And, it was such a huge experience. It was, I think, the largest independent exhibit structure that they had at Comic-Con that was outside of the actual building. So as far as one of the outdoor events, it was one of the largest square feet things that they had outside of I think the zombie run that took over the baseball field in Petco Park might have been bigger, but as far as its own individual structure, it was just really, really cool. It was there was museum level props and not even props like guns, but the full size city block of the Blade Runner world reimagined, and that you could walk in through, and it was just that was a really cool thing, and it was really fun to cover. I also have to say, the biggest thing would probably be some of the people I've been able to interview over the years. I did an interview with Gene Colan, famed artist of Tomb of Dracula and Daredevil for many years, so many years on the Bronze Age Daredevil. And that was a really, really fun interview. He was a really great guy, great to meet. And he passed away some years ago since the interview. And, it really made me feel, glad that I had that chance to meet him and to talk to him, ask him some questions, and kind of get some things and info and opinions on things documented that maybe other people hadn't asked him. And I've turned a couple of videos out of that from for the channel rather. So, interviewing and meeting guys like him and Jerry Robinson, one of the original creators of the 40s Batman comics, that was a real big thrill to talk to him and ask him some questions. And another one that sticks out for me is when I think it might have been my first Comic-Con that I was covering with, cameras and doing interviews, when in 2001, the DVD for the Batman 66 movie, not the TV show, but the movie that they had with the TV show cast, was coming out that year. And famously, the TV show didn't come out until just a couple of years ago because they had a lot of rights issues, I think with the music maybe. I'm not sure exactly. But the TV show was tied up in this legal drama. So the movie was going to be released on DVD, and it was the first official, release of that, 60s Batman material, and first on DVD ever. It was kind of a big deal. And so they were doing a big promotion there, and I got, to be involved with it, to cover it. And, I actually got to sit in the Batmobile that Adam West drove. That was a really cool moment that I totally didn't expect going into it. And just, it's again, that's another thing that, you couldn't do unless you were there covering it. And it definitely a memorable moment for me.
Nice. Alex.
See, some of the early memories were probably like working Bobby's booth for years while his sons were still babies and toddlers. His wife couldn't help him out at the booth, so we'd step in and help him. So that was always fun.
That's Bobby Rubio, correct?
Yeah, Bobby Rubio. And I guess probably one of the best memories was winning something from Sideshow. It was probably mid 2000s, when it wasn't too crazy yet. I actually won a Lord of the Rings statue, so that was pretty cool.
Oh, cool! What was the statue of?
What's his name? He was on a horse. I forgot the guy's name. It's been so long.
Aragorn?
I think so.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. It was a good size one too. It was like, 12, 16, 18 inches long, foot high. So it was a good size. It was a good size statue. So it was like, after that, I haven't won anything at all. So, let's see what else. More recently was probably just, I don't know, just, I guess, meeting more of the legendary people in the comics and pop cultural industry is like meeting Floyd Norman, just hearing him talk about his stint at Disney and actually working with, Walt Disney himself, things like that. Yeah,
that was amazing. That and he's done a couple cons in our area. Well, I mean, he's been at least at one, both San Diego and at Comic Fest as well.
Yeah.
And when you see him, that's just an amazing moment where you're like, wow, it's like you're in the presence of history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So those probably just a few of the many memories I've had.
For me, like just recently being a content creator, I had so much fun at Tony Kim's Game of Blogger events. So those were always great to get to know other content creators, out there. Meeting Susie Botello, she's the founder of the International Mobile Film Festival back in 2016 at her panel, showcasing how to make movies on a smartphone was a pretty, it was an interesting moment because I sort of went there on a whim because we had some off time, taking a break from, doing interviews. And I kind of decided I'm going to go check out a panel. And one of the ones I had bookmarked was her panel. So I went to go check it out. And, I got to know her after talking to her after the panel. And then we got to know her, later on. She's been on the podcast and I've been on her podcast, and now we're collaborators. So that initial meeting led to some pretty cool things. Like Alex, I worked Bobby Rubio's booth in 2018. That was a fun experience. I mean, we even met actor Rick Worthy from The Magicians. Yeah, he was just he was walking by, just checking out booths, and he ended up buying a couple of prints that Bobby created. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Being on a panel last year, the Heroes at the Mic panel, that was fun. And like Jason said, all the interviews. I mean, even going back to 2014 when we interviewed Poster Posse's founder, Don Thompson, that was pretty cool. And then fast forwarding a few years, 2017, Comic-Con Fit podcast, we had Karma Savage, and then also interviewed Uraeus from Black Heroes Matter, David Pepos, the creator of Spencer and Locke, Stefan Frank, the creator of Silver. And then 2018, got to interview Rob Salkowitz, Arlen Schumer, David Schrader, Ming Chen, and Leonard Sultana and Alyssa Franks. Then last year, I actually walked a lot to cover all these interviews. Carla Nappi, Tim Ludi, Michael Dooley, and Leo Partible. Those are all great interviews. And that's something that is definitely going to be missing this year, the in-person interviews. So that's just a few things that I'm definitely going to be missing.
It just has made me think recently that I've got to start just doing more online interviews, kind of like how we're using the technology now to get over the fact that it'd be a lot more difficult to do this in person with the social social distancing restrictions that we're under right now.
Definitely. And yeah, I sort of feel the same way too. I know a lot of our friends, like Leonard Sultana, he's been using a lot of the live streaming technology. I think he uses StreamYard, so I might be looking into that as well.
Yeah, I've done a couple streams with some other YouTube creators that I know, and it's been through StreamYard. Though I haven't set it up for myself, so it's like I'm still kind of trying to get up to speed on that and try it out.
Maybe we can experiment with each other.
That sounds great. Because it's like I've got a few people I can ping if I have questions or whatever, but it's also nice to learn with someone who's at your same level, so that you kind of are both figuring out stuff and kind of a little easier to trade information that way.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's get right into it. Comic-Con at home. Have you all had a chance to sort of peruse the panels?
Real quickly, I didn't just kind of browse through some stuff.
Okay.
Same here.
Okay. Do you want to go ahead, Jason?
Oh, let Alex go first this time.
Alex.
Let's see.
You know, technically we don't have to go by days, but I guess we could if you want, because I mean, since all the videos will be available online, it's not like you have to pick and choose which ones you have to go to because of.
Really, that's interesting, because I hadn't even thought of that yet. I assume that they are broad or streamed live. Though, do you think there'll be Q&A sections, or I don't know. I mean, I guess it makes sense that they would still have video copies up for you to watch again after the live element of it. But is there going to be any element of it that is live, or I'm
not sure exactly. I know. I think one panel might be live, so there might be some Q&A in there. But I know a lot of them have already been pre-recorded, so.
Oh, interesting. I did not know that, because I'm looking at the schedule and I'm thinking, oh, well, the panels are still broken up by times.
Yeah,
obviously,
I think they just did that just for nostalgic purposes,
Well, I think that I just quick to mention, I think that is an example of, again, one thing you're losing, with the current situation. And I'm not trying to bag on, Comic-Con at home. I think it's better to have that than nothing. It's just I think worthy of noting that, the Q&As, you got a chance to talk to even big guys. We had that panel that I went to with, I think it was Alex, that we went to that Jim Lee panel together. Is that right, Alex?
Yeah.
I wasn't 100% sure, but I thought so. And for some reason, even though that was a huge panel in a huge room, like at least a room of 500 people or more, you think?
Yeah, definitely.
And for some reason, there weren't that many people in the line for the Q&A section. And I was one of the first people to get in line. And then when the line was almost done, there's still 10 minutes left in it, I went back up and asked a second question. And so I got a chance to talk to Jim Lee twice. Jim Lee, one of the, big artists of our day in the 90s. I mean, that's something that apparently, we're going to lose, I guess, at least for the most part in this online version.
Yeah, it is sad, and I understand what you're saying. And I'm just sort of going by, I guess, how WonderCon at home was. I don't think there was any Q&A on those panels, those online panels.
Okay. You know what? I didn't do that, so I wasn't aware of that. So I see you've got a little bit better idea of how it's going to go.
I don't think I even watched one panel for WonderCon at home.
But that interests me now, because so would you assume then, Aaron, that those WonderCon panels, since they did that and they put them up and you don't really have to watch them live necessarily, that means that they're still up and available, I would assume, right?
Don't quote me on that. I don't know. you would think, but
because they don't do that officially in the normal Comic-Con.
True.
So for last year, you can find a lot of recordings of the panels, but I believe most, if not all of those, are like fan recordings.
Yeah,
I know sometimes they record it in-house, but I don't think they just put that stuff up online. They just record it for preservation's sake. Is that right?
Yeah, I think after Comic-Con HQ went under.
They were the ones handling it mostly?
Yeah, they were the ones who were supposed to do, live stream of panels and recordings of panels, but I don't. They never really did a good job of that when they were up and running.
Well, okay, then we finally found a real, plus with the Comic-Con online, and that is apparently it sounds like it is going to have a better level of preservation of these panels.
Yeah.
Because if it's online, then it's available, and that information, isn't going to get lost to history necessarily. Whereas, that was one thing that was frustrating. You'd always see people recording panels, but you kind of knew in the back of your head there was no real chance you were ever going to get a chance to see that panel, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting because, like, last year I went to a panel for, it was one of the 50th anniversary panels. And I think it was, like, the latest decade. And Jim Lee was on there. And one question the panelists were asked was, like, what's the future of Comic-Con going forward? And he brought and exactly what we're doing now is like a lot more, VR maybe, or live streaming panels, live streaming events. So it's funny how, thinking about that question is like relevant right now.
Interesting.
And to answer your question, I clicked on one of the videos that's available for WonderCon at home, and it still works. So.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Well, I might have to, you guys just piqued my curiosity about that. I might have to go around to that website and poke through it and see if there are any panels that I would have liked to have caught.
Cool.
Let's see. Yeah. Okay. I'll continue with like some of the panels that I like caught my eye. First one, I think I don't have it in order, so this one's on Friday at 10. But it's about the title is Reclaiming Indigenous History and Culture Through Comics. And it has Che Glary, which he was at San Diego Comic Fest, which was the last comics event that we went to, or probably even happened this year. And he has a comic book out, and so now he has a couple more people to talk about, indigenous history and told through comics. So that should be a interesting one to watch.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
Yeah. And I think there's one or two more with, I think, indigenous or Latinx stories told through graphic novels and comics. A couple other ones. I've never been to Oddball Comics by Scott Shaw, so it'd be cool to see one.
That's always a classic. I think I've only been to one of those, but I've definitely been exposed to Scott Shaw's work and a lot of other, online and such, and that's classic.
Yeah, so I always have it checked off every year, but I never go because there's so much to see and do. And
I think, isn't it usually like on Saturday night or something?
See, this one is... this one's Thursday at noon.
Okay, I'm trying to remember if...
or normally, huh?
You know what? I can't remember. I thought maybe it was when I was going to Spike and Mike's on Saturday night with someone, and it was the one before that. But it might have been... regardless, I was going with someone, or I was going to the panel that was coming after, or something like that, meaning that I wasn't intending to go there, but he's, I already was familiar with his work and love it, and the stuff that he finds is just so hilarious. It's always entertaining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another one I picked was, I guess it kind of pertains to today's events, is the future of entertainment. And I guess you got a bunch of panelists to talk about technology and how it's going to be used in the future of entertainment overall, from esports to production. They even have Lee Steinberg. I guess he's a big sports agent. I think was he Michael Jordan's? Was he?
Yeah, Lee Steinberg.
Yeah, he's on this panel, so it's just interesting what he has to say about entertainment overall.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you guys watch Last Dance?
No, I haven't.
Oh wow, it's pretty good. You guys should check it out if you get a chance.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I remember when it first came out, everyone was talking about it. Another one I picked was title is this is not the apocalypse you're looking for. Real life disasters and fictional recovery. I guess they have like public health experts, trauma therapists, and I don't know. I just picked it because how it relates to current times. A few other ones was like Bugs Bunny's 80th anniversary. So they're going to talk about, and it's going to be moderated by Yvette Nicole Brown. So she's always a good host. So.
Do you remember that time we were at the back of the convention center getting fish tacos, at the food truck?
Yeah,
and she was there.
Who is this?
Yvette Nicole Brown. She was on Community, and she's on Talking Dead a lot.
Oh, okay. She's an actress?
Yeah, she's an actress.
Okay.
She was in Endgame. She was an African American lady in the elevator.
Okay.
Yeah. So she knows her stuff too. So another one Friday at 10 in the morning is The Mandalorian and His Many Gadgets. So there's I
was gonna say I saw that was one of the panels, and I'm like, oh, I should have mentioned that for TV, because that was one series that I did make it all the way through. That was absolutely phenomenal, and it sounds, Alex, like you thought so too, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's why I picked this panel. Just plus I like science too, so joining.
It's about his gadgets,
science.
Right? Is that right?
What was that?
Is it because it's about his gadgets? Is that right?
It's about his gadgets.
I didn't put it on my list, but obviously something that I would be interested in, but it didn't make the cut, though I still am going over the schedule to fine tune it. But for the list that we're talking about here, I didn't put it on my list, but that's definitely a good call, Alex.
Yeah. So they're going to talk about, tracking fobs, the jetpacks, the wrist rockets and flamethrowers. So that should be pretty fun to listen to. Again, like I said, lately I've been listening to a lot. I've been liking a lot of panels from historic figures and stuff. So there's one called Decoding the Kirby Lee Dynamic. So they're going to talk about Jack Kirby and Stan Lee and how they created all these Marvel Silver Age characters.
That was one that I bookmarked too, and it's going to be hosted by Rob Sakowitz, so that should be a good one.
That sounds very interesting.
Yeah, and see a couple more. See, I guess for some new stuff, some current stuff is AMC's The Walking Dead World Beyond. I guess it's their new series, so that should be interesting to hear since I haven't been really keeping up with the older stuff.
Is that what you said? Spinoff? Is that a spinoff series?
I'm not sure. It's the third series. I'm not sure how it relates to the other two shows. But it's a new series. So, and that's Friday at 2 p.m.
Interesting.
Yeah.
They are really getting their mileage out of that franchise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess Scott M. Gimble will be on that panel.
I'm really bummed out. I have not been able to find my footage of the Fear the Walking Dead exhibit at Comic-Con. Did you guys ever see that?
Which
no.
one was?
When Fear the Walking Dead, I believe when it first came out, probably this would have been the summer before it, whenever it debuted or whatever. And they had a really cool exhibit. It wasn't the biggest exhibit, so it wasn't like it on par with the Walking Dead exhibits, but it was one of the cooler ones, at least as far as, it was just a photo op type exhibit, but it was one of the cooler photo ops. Basically, now this might spark your memory, because if you saw it, it had an indelible image. They recreated an airplane, the cabin of an airplane, like about 10 feet of airplane cabin, like about, 5, 8, 10 rows of seats inside this rounded airplane cabin. I assume it had something to do with the storyline. I never actually started on Fear the Walking Dead because I was going to finish or catch up at least on the regular Walking Dead before I started the new one. And so I never watched the show, but I did get in line and do that. And so basically you would get into one of the seats in the airplane, and there were a bunch of actors that were zombies around you. And so, they would be all like clawing at you, and you could either, act like you're scared or whatever. And it was a photo op. Well, I had my video camera there. And so I told them, however long you can do it, just record for that. So if you can give me 10 seconds, 15 seconds, because normally it'd just be you click a couple pictures and you move on. I'm like, I want video. So just record it as long as you can with, not out feeling like you're giving me special treatment or whatever. So that I had like somewhere on one of my tapes, I have footage of, me in this airplane section going, with these zombies clawing at me or whatever. I'm giving like the classic horror movie scream or whatever. It was a really fun, memorable exhibit from an earlier Comic-Con.
Yeah, I hope you find that video. That'd be cool to see.
I'll give you a heads up if it turns up. I assume it will, but always have so many hard drives to go through and find footage.
Let's see, a couple more real quick. An Evening with Kevin Smith on Saturday. Should be a fun one to listen to. And from our friends at Little Fish Comic Studios, they have one on Sunday. Just talk about what's going on for this year and for the future. There's one interesting one is teaching and learning with comics. So I remember going to, I think it was there's a panel that TJ did with Alonzo at the San Diego Library for an event, and he was talking about how to use comics as a learning tool.
Mm-hmm. I remember that.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't attend it, but I remember hearing about that. I remember him seeing him promote it and finding out about it.
Yeah, it was a book event, I believe.
Oh yeah, that panel was right after my panel.
Uh-huh.
It was for the San Diego Writers Festival.
Okay, yeah, that was it. Yeah, that was a real good panel.
Yeah, so. I can listen to Alonzo Nunez and TJ Shevlin talk about comics or anything.
Oh yeah. Definitely. Let's see, last two. Let's see, this one I always check off every year, but I never go. Is Super Asian America, just Asian influence in storytelling in today's industry.
What day is that on?
That one is Sunday at 2 p.m.
It's mainly about comic books?
Mostly people in, looks like TV and film industry.
Okay, because that sounds really, really cool. I've actually just recently, on YouTube, found a bunch of old Japanese TV show and movies, clips or reviews, a variety of different things that I had been watching that just reminded, stuff I hadn't seen in a while. Well, some stuff, most of it I hadn't ever heard of, but reminded me that, of that, especially in the 60s and 70s, they kind of had an influence. And then in the 80s, really, with their cartoons, became a big influence then as well. Right. But love some of that classic stuff.
Let's see. I guess the last one I'll mention will be Sunday at 1 p.m. is the star is an executive producer of ABC's The Goldbergs.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, because I think I went to a panel during WonderCon. I think it was last year or 2 years ago. It was pretty cool. So Goldbergs is one of my favorite shows because I guess I was about that age when the setting of that show is. So
I didn't start watching it because I don't watch sitcoms very much these days, and it's a sitcom. But it just came up on my radar recently because another YouTuber that I've met and met him on Facebook and have become acquaintances with is a guy named Brett Weiss who covers retro video games. Mm-hmm. And mainly like, pre-2000 stuff and going back to the 70s as well. And he's got a new book coming out, which is I think the Super Nintendo Omnibus, or some giant book of, encyclopedia of Super Nintendo games. And I believe you said the guy's name is Adam Goldberg. Yeah. Alex, is that right? Yeah, he did the foreword for this guy's book, for Brett's book.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and Brett was talking about it on Facebook, and I didn't realize how much of a pop culture. I mean, I knew that it was set in the past, the Goldbergs, but I didn't realize that they would really be, leveraging all those pop culture references and stuff. And it made me think, oh man, I definitely want to check this out. It sounds like the show has a lot of cool old school references, kind of like a Big Bang Theory, but set in the 80s or whatever.
Yeah, it's pretty cool because like after each episode, he has actual footage when he was a teenager and some of his real life footage that they used to influence the show. So
like of him opening up his video games at Christmas and stuff, or something like that, or playing them, or. And
it's his real life home videos that he used to do as a teenager.
Yeah, it's hilarious. He's definitely got the street cred. Then he's not just a poser.
Yep. Yeah. There's a few more, but those are like some of the ones I picked out.
Awesome. Jason.
I got to say that the more we've been talking, the more bummed out I am to realize there's no Q&A, because I just started realizing how much a lot of the panels, I mean, not all of them. In most panels, I don't go up and ask questions or whatever. But a lot of times when I am selecting my panels, I'm thinking, oh, okay, I want to hear what this person has to say. But also, no one ever asks them about that one episode from the second season, But so if I go up on the Q&A and only have one question, I could still get something, very unique and interesting out of them that, that wouldn't have come out normally. And so it's definitely, as we talk, and again, I don't want to be, too negative on this. I'm glad they're doing it. And who knows, like you guys say, this may even be the future. Though I would assume at some point, if this became common, there'd be some element of streaming it and being able to take some audience questions. I would just have to assume that would be, something that they would do. I mean, that's how if you look at YouTubers or Twitch people, there's constant interaction and questions coming in from the audiences that they react to. So, it might have been easier for them this first time to be able to pre-record things, but I would assume at some point that's got to be a larger part of the process. Mm-hmm. Okay, with that said, like Alex had said to preface his commentary, I'm still whittling down my list, and actually I'll still even be going back through the schedule looking for more to add, but these are just some of the ones that really stuck out to me, as I was going through, my first basic rundown of the schedule. Geek Ed, Watchmen and the Cruelty of Masks. And it definitely is a panel that has to do with the HBO show. And so I'm really interested in that. It's kind of talking about how anonymous online personalities allow for a masking of our identity. So it sounds like there's going to be some interesting, talk about, the fictional narratives and themes, and also how some of these themes, leak into our real life, and even said it's going to touch on, the remoteness due to, COVID-19 or so. But the idea sounded interesting to me. I'm really interested in, literary themes and some of the themes that underlie, superheroes and comic books and all genre material, horror, sci-fi movies, that types of thing. And that sounded interesting to me. And also I am a sucker for, like I said, anything Alan Moore, and specifically anything Watchmen is always interesting. And I think there's another Watchmen panel at the show, but I did not put it on my list, so I'm not sure if it was because there's something else in that time slot, or if I just wasn't sure if it was, maybe I'll go back and reread that. But just for anyone out there who's looking for Watchmen material, you can find at least 2 panels there at the online Comic-Con. All right, so next up on the list, and I'm just going in order from Thursday down. Let's see, what do we got next on the list? Okay, well, this is going to be a pick-me-up. Art and the Holocaust. Obviously not the lightest material there, but that is something that I thought would be very fascinating. I know that you both are familiar with Art Spiegelman's Mouse.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, just due to that, comic books have a strong tie to that part of our history, but even more so have a strong connection to those topics because so much of comics was built by Jewish immigrants in the 30s, right around the time. Some of them were forced out of Germany at the time, or fled just before it got so bad they were forced out, or it got so bad that they couldn't get out. So you have that element of it, and I'm not saying that I don't know exactly what they're going to be covering in there, but I would have to assume that Mouse would be related to it. But I actually studied the Holocaust a little bit in college through a bit of a circuitous way. I was not a history major. I just took the same standard history classes that everyone took. So I didn't get any special knowledge out of it from that. But when I was in the mass communications major, and I was studying broadcasting and television, there was I took 2 classes that dealt with documentaries, and both of those classes dealt with documentaries of the Holocaust. And one of those classes was just called Documentaries of the Holocaust. That's all it dealt with. And the teacher of, I don't know if he taught both, but I know that he taught at least one of those, was a man who had survived. His family had survived, or at least he and part of his family had gotten out or survived World War II in the Holocaust from the Nazis. And so that was, it was a very difficult class to take, both of them, or at least the section of the one that dealt with that. Both were very difficult to deal with. It was very harsh subject material, and it was really eye-opening. It really left an indelible impact on me because I was really shocked at how little I knew about it going into those classes. And I felt some anger at my elementary and high school, or elementary through high school teachers that this hadn't been more explicitly. I mean, everybody knows that there was World War II and that the Nazis were bad, but when you find out the extent of this and the specificity and how much of it that they documented, it really blew me away. And it's really important information because there's so many people that try to deny that history, and it's so ironic because it's the most, it's been called this often, the most documented crime in world history. They did paperwork to keep track, because they weren't really that ashamed internally within the country about what they were doing, or at least the people that were facilitating this. So, it's an interesting part of history, something that we can't ever forget. And I do have a special interest in when things that are outside of fantasy and comics and this type of fiction do connect with it, whether it's thematically, as Alex had mentioned with Star Trek episodes that we're talking about, oppression and classism or whatever, or if it's something more specific in history like Mouse does. And so I thought that was a really interesting sounding panel, and you might be curious to know this, Aaron. It's going to be on the panel, anyways, is Matt Dunford, friend of the show.
I saw that. He happens to be he happens to be a World War II historian himself, so that should be interesting.
I knew that he's talked about that a lot, and I know that he has that background. But it's funny when I put the panel on my list, I didn't realize that until I started reading into it a little bit more.
And I think
so. I'm not just going because of you, Matt. I definitely am interested to see you and the panel.
And I think this panel's rather timely because of the recent anti-Jewish sentiment that's been floating around.
Yeah, that is something that was on my mind, and I always worry and hesitate over how much to tie things to current events that are because there's just so much online difficultness there's that's so I did allude to it with the concept of Holocaust deniers, because when we just have had some specific examples recently. There was Nick Cannon is the most recent. Are you guys familiar with that?
Yeah, I've been following it.
So he didn't say deny the Holocaust, but he's very close to that. He was Holocaust denying adjacent, you might say, because he was trafficking in some very potent anti-Semitic memes, if you will, that go back hundreds of years, and most famously were things that the Germans proclaimed that led to what they did in committing the atrocity of the Holocaust. These conspiracy theories of Jews running the media and the banks, and so. I actually was thinking about I might do a video on that, because even though it's outside my normal purview. I mean, Nick Cannon is an entertainer, and I think a lot of people that don't know the history, like I said, I was shocked that I didn't know this history from my normal high school history training until I took this class, just which I didn't intend on when I started college, and the fact that I would, so I assume a lot of people don't know the ins and outs of this, and they hear someone like Nick Cannon that they look up to, and he says something like that, and so it maybe kind of sounds a little bit, legit or whatever, and they don't know the reality of it, and then that informs their thinking as time goes on, and that's how some of these, pernicious conspiracies and pernicious attitudes towards minorities can spread and become dangerous.
Yeah. Agreed.
I think you'll like this panel, because the past two Comic Fests, this year and last year, they had an Art and Holocaust panel.
Oh, and, really?
Yeah, Matt moderated it, and I think it was Sandra Scheller who's listed on this panel.
Yeah, she's the one. She's there again this year too.
Yeah, and she lives here in Chula Vista, and she was supposed to open up an exhibit with some of her mom's belongings, but since I think it was April that they were supposed to open up, but with everything going on, they couldn't do it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think it was at the Chula Vista Library. She was supposed to have an exhibit there.
Interesting. I definitely, that's the more we're talking about it, the more I'm thinking this is going to be, one of my must-see panels at Comic-Con at Home. So, yeah, I didn't mean to bring us down or whatever, but I think this stuff is important. And like I said, I'm almost hesitant to say it, because you just know that it's going to bring out some trolls. And that's I kind of been hemming and hawing about whether I do that video on my channel. But I think I'm going to do it because I've got a little bit of a perspective here. Because I'm telling you, it was literally grueling to watch those documentaries, because a lot of the footage is so, I mean, it's disgusting. I don't know how else to say it, but it's as a journalist, I've always said ever since college that truth is one of the most important things to me, just because something's uncomfortable and horrible and will put you in a bad mood, you can't let that put blinders on you. So it's something that's important, and it's definitely one of the panels that I'm interested in. Okay, let's move on and do something a little bit lighter. This one I put on my list tentatively, so I'm not 100% sure. It looks like it might be covering more modern stuff than I had originally thought, but James Bond 007 in comic books. And so it said it's going to dive deeply into James Bond's history in, well, I guess it just said history overall. But, I don't know. I assume that there has to be a history of James Bond licensed comics over the years. You would think so, because like in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s, they were always licensing TV shows and movies for stuff. And so, like Gold Key comics, I don't know. I assume that there was some old stuff in there. And I know that, that continued, through days where, we were kids, because I don't know if you guys had ever heard of that. There's a cartoon, James Bond Jr., like from the late 80s or the early 90s or something.
I don't think I saw that one.
Yeah, I didn't really catch it much, but I mean, I was like, what? They got a James Bond Jr. cartoon out? Just such a crazy thought. And I love the adaptation process. James Bond was an adaptation from a novel to a movie. And then to take these and then adapt them into comic books or cartoons or whatever, that's stuff that video games. That's stuff that I've always loved. I mean, I remember playing in like 1982 or 83 the James Bond video game for the Atari 2600, if you can believe that. And it was like, as those games, it wasn't much of a James Bond experience, but it was basically it was like Moon Buggy. You ever heard of that? Or Moon Patrol? You ever heard of that?
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
It's a driving game, and your car shoots to the front and shoots up, and then you can jump, and it really bouncy big jumps or whatever. And you were basically driving the White Lotus from the Roger Moore, I don't know, not Octopussy, but like Live and Let Die, I guess it might have been. When he switched over from the Aston Martin to the Lotus, a white 80s Lotus, which just looked so cool. I thought that was the coolest car when I was a kid. It was the one that goes underwater.
Underwater?
Yeah. The submarine Lotus. So anyways, obviously it's very simplistic adaptation of the source material, but I'm always interested in those things. And I hadn't really thought much about James Bond as a comic book property. And they've got a new series coming out. I was going to say new show, but a new comic series coming out, or maybe it's already out. I haven't done much looking into it, but I believe it is. Yeah, it's published by Dynamite Comics, which is done a lot of really cool comics based on really old properties, which is stuff I think is kind of cool.
I think they did the Bruce Lee comic too.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
See, I'm definitely aware of its Superpowers project, I think it was called, where they brought like comic book characters from the 40s and 50s back into, I think a lot of them even had their licenses had been expired, or they were in the public domain or something like that. Have you guys heard about those ones? Like kind of like the Shadow. I don't know if they do the Shadow specifically. I forget now, but you know what I'm talking about, these old characters.
Nope.
Well, regardless, like there's the Golden Age Daredevil. Have you ever heard of that? The Golden Age Daredevil? Did you know that there's a Daredevil before Daredevil?
I had no idea.
Yeah, it was created by a small, not really small at the time. They were a huge hit publisher, but the publisher went out of business and all of its properties lapsed. And it was allegedly, how the story goes is the legal department contacted Stan Lee and told him, hey, this Daredevil property has just lapsed into the public domain. And allegedly that's what sparked Stan Lee to create the Marvel version of Daredevil. Because Daredevil, the Golden Age, was like selling as much as Superman back then.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Do they have similar abilities?
No.
Oh.
No. Well, no, actually, no, they do. Yeah, I was thinking of Superman for some reason, but you meant obviously the two Daredevils.
Right.
They do. They're both street level physical guys without powers. And interestingly, Daredevil's second costume was half red and half like dark blue black, kind of like how they draw Daredevil nowadays. Not the shape, obviously. He was divided vertically in half, kind of like like a Gemini character or something like that. Like the left was red and the right was blue, but still the redness was like interesting to me as far as a slight commonality to the modern Daredevil. He had a boomerang, so he didn't have a billy club, but he had a boomerang, and he had a disability. Now, whereas the modern Daredevil was blind, this Daredevil was mute. Kind of a little bit more of a nonsensical disability, and they ended up dispatching with it, I think, because it made the comics harder to write. Obviously, if he can't talk to anyone, and the series ended up diverging away from its superhero roots into more crime stories, and Daredevil actually kind of like just became a character to kind of introduce the stories, and really he had a cadre of like little kids that it became a little kids book where he had a bunch of followers, kind of like the Newsboy Legion or is one of those old things. Anyway, it's interesting tidbit in comic book history. I did a lot of research into it when I was researching Daredevil, and so when Dynamite brought back all these old lapsed characters that no one had touched or, done anything with for, 40 years, 50 years. Daredevil was one of them. And so I was like, it really made me interested in what Dynamite was doing. And so apparently they are working on a new series with James Bond. And I loved what they're doing. And they often have those Alex Ross covers these days on their books. And so it was something that I thought might be pretty interesting to check out. So I put it on the list.
Cool.
But I probably digressed a little bit too much there. Sorry about that, guys. I'll move on here. Untold Tales of Todd McFarlane. Now, I just coincidentally had recently stumbled across a video from like 1999. It was someone put it up on YouTube, and it was basically Peter David versus Todd McFarlane debate at Comic-Con. I don't know if you guys had ever heard of that before.
No.
See, as I was watching it, I started getting recollections of having read about it, that like this infamous debate or whatever, where they took each other on or whatever. But I thought it was fascinating, and I think McFarlane is a fascinating character, and there's some stuff that I eventually want to get around to doing on my channel to comment and explore on some of the things that he did. I'm not a Todd McFarlane expert. I haven't read all his comic books, but I was collecting comic books when Image was created, and I collected, at least like the first 20 issues or so of Spawn, and so I was, front row seat of the Image, revolution when that happened. And then also as someone who's studied film and TV and animation history, what he did he really was a pioneer in that he was kind of like became the Howard Hughes or the Elon Musk of comic books in the 90s, because he was the one. Some of the other guys followed in his wake, I think, but he was the trailblazer. And another thing that was part of that was what he did with toys. So not only did he make incredible inroads and success forging new product and IP in comic books and in animation adaptations and in film adaptations. Spawn was adapted both into an HBO animated series and a live action movie, obviously. And then what he did into toys, not only delivering some amazing, industry leading, amazing doesn't do it justice, industry leading, groundbreaking toys, to the point, and a big part of how he did that was he ended up creating his own toy company. I mean, again, I always try to have a nuanced look, and there's a lot of things that McFarlane's done or said over the years that I don't appreciate or I outwardly am hostile to, but I'll never forget that, and I don't think any of his detractions can take away from what he built in the 90s. It was really impressive, and obviously continued since and such. I'm not trying to say just the 90s, but so when I saw that, I know he always has a panel there, and I just seen that Peter David Todd McFarlane debate, and I thought that might be kind of interesting to check out too. So as of yet, that's on my list as well. All right, moving on. All right, this one might throw you a curveball. Horror is queer. Now, this panel is put on by Shudder, which is a I think it's a channel, but I know it's a website that offers a streaming service, I believe, like a Netflix for horror films and such. I'm sure you guys are probably familiar with that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now I don't know a ton about it, but as soon as I saw it, it made sense to me because, I don't know, have you guys seen the movie Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, and do you know any of the backstory and history behind that?
I don't remember Part 2. Refresh my memory.
Okay, Part 2. So he was he was defeated in the first one, but they have that little teaser like they didn't kill him after all, and he's going to come back or whatever, right? Well, my recollection is that Part 2 has nothing to do with the first one in terms of the characters. It's a totally fresh story. You know, later on in the series, I think they bring back, and maybe the sheriff that comes back. I can't remember exactly. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but it's basically about this kid who's seeing Freddy in his nightmares, just like the kids did in the first one. But Freddy's he's just focusing on this kid to try and somehow like use him to come into the real world. Kind of like, when Apocalypse is about to die, and he tries to, in the movie, the X-Men Apocalypse, he tries to transfer his, essence into, I think Professor X's body or someone else's body, right? He's trying to use that to bridge the gap from the dream world into the real world, so he can, have completely unfettered horror capabilities or whatever, right? Well, it was a good movie. I think the first 3 Nightmare on Elm Streets are all pretty strong entries in the franchise, and but so I remember watching that when I was a kid in the 80s when that came out, and it wasn't until like a couple of years ago where I stumbled upon this documentary on YouTube about it that talked about how the whole movie is a metaphor for a gay person that's in the closet, and that on a double meta level, the actor who played the lead character himself was gay.
Oh, wow.
And was in the closet, right? And was in the closet for, obviously he was an aspiring actor, and that was considered a death penalty for an actor to find out that they were gay. They wouldn't be cast in any heterosexual role, again. It was, just that's what the times were at the time. So it's a really interesting and complex, set of themes and that cross over into real life. And it was it was like a total wake-up call for me, because suddenly I'm like, oh my God, there were some scenes in there where you're like, what the hell's going on? Like there's a scene where the kid finds himself at an S&M club and sees his coach, his high school coach there. And it's like, what's that all about? And then later on, I think his high school coach is abusive or something. And later on, the high school coach gets taken out by Freddy or whatever. I think they imply in this case, Freddy is actually killing people by possessing the dude's body. And then so the dude has like some culpability in it. And so it was almost like partially like he was getting revenge against his abusive coach from school or whatever. But anyways, so to suddenly decades later, learn this bit of history and this, that some of the thematic underpinnings of the movie just shocked me. And I knew that in a lot of cinema, a lot of specifically with, homosexuality or non-binary or trans sexuality in movies, that's a lot of times they've had to do it really under the radar and stuff. There was a documentary called The Celluloid Closet that came out, I think, when I was in college in the late 90s, and that documented a lot of that stuff. So I was familiar with that, that idea or whatever, but it's kind of a revelation to see that in relation to this movie that I saw when I was a kid. And of course I was, we were like 12 or 13. So that type of thematic underpinning completely went over our heads. We just walked out of the theater going, yeah, there are a couple weird scenes in there. What was that all about? Never put 2 and 2 together. So when I saw Horror is Queer, I thought, oh, that sounds fascinating. Maybe they'll develop that and tell me a little bit more about other stories in the past that that I was aware of but didn't realize, whatever. And hey, our friend from earlier in the conversation, Brian Fuller, is going to be one of the creators on the panel. He is a gay man, and so that should be interesting. He's obviously a guy that's really fascinating to hear what he's talking about, whether it's Star Trek or in this case, queer in horror.
Cool.
All right, so let's move on the list. Okay, this is one of the ones that I put on the list because I thought I might be able to do a Q&A. So I'm not 100% sure.
Speaking of Q&A, I did a little research, and on the SDCC blog, they list some panels as having Q&A, but not all of them do. Okay,
cool. Well, this one probably won't because it has big Hollywood people, and so I'm guessing for those ones might be the ones more likely to be pre-recorded because those people are so rich and powerful. They're so busy. We need to make special accommodations, I'm sure. But this one is called "Entertainment is Female: A Conversation with Hollywood Executives." And the first thing that this is unfortunately going to get a little political too, but the first thing that I thought of when I saw that was Kathleen Kennedy and her, famously wearing the T-shirt that said "The Force is Female," and she was posing in a picture with a bunch of women. I think some of them, or they might have been other female creators in the series or whatever. I'm not sure. And of course, there's been a strong anti-feminist backlash against Kathleen Kennedy and specifically Star Wars and some of the feminist underpinnings of some of the Star Wars production, specifically the sequel trailers. And I thought it would be really interesting to, if they don't address it too directly, to comment on that backlash a little bit more. So that was one that I thought, a lot of times I'll attend a panel, just to see if maybe there's a chance to, inject a topic that they might skirt over or ignore completely. And so that was one of them. So I was planning on that, but I probably expect that will not be one of the Q&A panels, but who knows? We'll see. It was something that I thought was interesting. I've been very interested in the whole controversies around Star Wars. I feel like I'm one of the people caught in the middle because some people get actually triggered by that phrase, "the Force is female," and a lot of times when I see these anti-Star Wars sequel screeds, they'll complain about "the Force is female," and that just sounds absolutely ridiculous to me. But on the other hand, I actually do agree with a lot of the general criticisms of Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker that. And of course, a lot of people lump any criticisms of that stuff into, the haters and the trolls. And so it's a topic that's interesting to me, and I thought that might be an interesting panel as well. All right, moving on. Harryhausen 100, Into the Ray Harryhausen Archive. Harryhausen, obviously a legendary filmmaker and animator, pioneer of stop frame animation, did some of the best animation sequences in genre history, things like Clash of the Titans, Earth versus the Flying Saucers, and so many more. Sinbad, The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, and Jason of the Argonauts. So important to animation and film history. Is a guy I've followed for years. Consuming documentaries, recording on VHS off of TV documentaries that I would find on him on Turner Classic Movies back in the late 90s and such. Really big fan of his. And almost every year they have panels at Comic-Con on Ray Harryhausen, and it's always a panel that gets at least onto my long list. Sometimes I often miss them because it's conflicting with something else or something pops up, as is often in con. Of course, since we don't have in-person con, it might be a little easier to actually attend all the panels that you're planning or that you want to this time, because you don't have to worry about getting in line and whether you get into it and all that kind of stuff, or just dealing with other issues of Comic-Con, the traffic and and everything. So I would hope to catch that one again. I'm always interested in anything he does. Are you guys Harryhausen fans?
Yeah, I mean, I loved Clash of the Titans when I was a kid. I think I watched it like numerous times for sure.
Uh-huh.
And also the like Jason and the Argonauts. All those movies were awesome.
Yeah, Jason and the Argonauts. I remember as a kid seeing an old repeat of that on television, and the skeleton fighting scene, that classic legendary scene, just blew me away. But ever since then, the more I've found out about his career, I just love it all. So that's always worth mentioning. Moving along, Mattel Creations, designing pop culture. I'm a big fan of toy history. That's an area that I only cover minimally on my channel, though I do have a little bit of coverage up there of toy history, and it is something that I'll revisit in the future. But, if you're a kid in the 80s or around that era, even though I wasn't as much of a kid in the 70s, a lot of those toys were kind of still around, or you'd be familiar with them or get them sometimes at garage sales or hand-me-down thrift stores, whatever, that kind of stuff. And so Mattel just had so much that, contributed to the pop culture of the 80s, especially obviously things like, He-Man and stuff like that was, just amazing, and they just barely missed out on the Star Wars license. They had a chance to get it, but Kenner ended up getting it, so they lost out on that one. But they did so many other things. Okay, moving on. We have here first look at Hulu's Hellstrom. That sounds interesting. That is obviously a TV show that's coming up. That's based on the Marvel Comics property. Damon Hellstrom, son of Satan, which was an interesting. I picked up a couple rando issues of some of those series when I was a kid collecting in the 80s and 90s, and it was almost a comic that you'd check out just because of the audaciousness of the title, Son of Satan. I mean, it's almost like, are you even allowed to get away with that in conservative Reagan 80s? It was like, oh, okay, I'll buy this, but I got to make sure it's on the bottom of my stack, because if my mom walks by and sees that, she will freak out.
Yeah, I think my first exposure to his character was, I guess, during the Defenders.
Yes, same here. I think it was digging through in the mid 80s. I was digging through the quarter bins and would have rando issues of Defenders pop up. And so I think that's where I got it from him at first as well. When I got back into collecting comic books in college in the 90s, Marvel, the industry was exploding. It was that speculator period before the crash. And
right.
Marvel was adding just dozens of titles. It seemed almost like every month. And so they did an imprint of comics, or a line of comics that were dealing with all their horror characters that they hadn't done any comic books on in a long time. And so, a bunch of these first issues were coming out. And so I was buying up just about everything at the time. And I ended up buying a bunch of those horror titles that they were relaunching. Hellstrom was one of them. Ghost Rider was one of them. Blade the Vampire Hunter was like the first time they had really brought that character back since Tomb of Dracula. Of course, and I think the Darkhold was even one of the comic books that came out. And of course, it was funny because then Blade became, I can't remember if this was I think it was right before the movie came out. So it wasn't like just in the wake of the movie's success necessarily, but certainly, after the movie came out, Blade has become such a huge character in Marvel's pantheon. And so it was cool to, be collecting those comic books that relaunched that character and gave him his first, solo ongoing series. So, anyways, it's such a weird property. I'm always interested in genre fusion, the mixing of different genres. And to see, Marvel's superhero universe have these horror elements, I've always thought that was interesting. I've always liked collecting old Ghost Rider issues from the 70s and 80s and such. So when I saw that was coming out, I thought that's kind of interesting. I'm wondering what they're going to do with it, and how it's going to look. I'm very interested to see how, stylized it is, or if it's just kind of more of a straight horror movie or whatever. So it's a first look. I haven't seen anything on the new Hellstrom. I knew it was coming out, or generally vaguely that it was in development, but that sounded interesting. Are you either you guys interested in that TV show?
I am now.
Yeah, I was reading it. It looked interesting.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay. Another thing that I had on the list here, the long list, is the annual Jack Kirby tribute panel, of course, as per usual, that's going to be hosted by Mark Evanier, and it looks like Alex Ross is going to be on the panel this year, which should be interesting, and I think it has the two Morrows, Mark and John from Tomorrow's Publishing, which is. Publishes a lot of content of and about Jack Kirby, like the Jack Kirby Collector. So that sounds like it's interesting. I always try to catch a Jack Kirby panel. A lot of times there's more than one at the Comic-Cons, and so that was something that I put on my list as well.
Cool.
All right. Moving to the end of the list here, I'll wrap it up. This one was out of left field, and again, I apologize one final time that it'll slightly dip into the political world. I try to avoid that in talking about this entertainment, but I think you guys agree that sometimes you just can't separate them. And this one is called IDW, The Mueller Report in 10 Minutes.
Yeah, I saw that.
Oh, you did? Okay. It was interesting. So Shannon Wheeler and Steve Doohan are going to be, one's from comics, one's a journalist, are going to, be going over the Mueller report. And it's interesting. I'm not sure. Okay, yeah, I think it is. They're saying they're turning it into a small or short graphic novel, which I found kind of fascinating because I've seen some other kind of real world types of graphic novels that adapt real events that we all experienced. And so I was very curious to see what that was about. Don't really know much about it. But, I don't know. They mentioned the talks about conspiracy theories, and so I was wondering how much of that they might address in the panel. I thought it was interesting. So, again, it's made my initial cut. And then finally, there was a tribute to Dennis O'Neil and his work on Batman. So Dennis O'Neil just recently passed away, as I'm sure you two are aware. And obviously, he was a legendary force in 70s and 80s comics, and more since then as well, but that's what I'll mostly know him from, or mostly remember him from. And Dennis was a fellow that I got to meet and do a very lengthy interview with back in, I think it was 2010. And so that was first of all, he was incredibly gracious. He gave me basically, I think, at least a 45-minute interview. Maybe it wasn't that long. I might be mixing it up with another one, but it was over a half hour. Very interesting. We talked a lot about Daredevil and a little bit about his work on Batman and Green Lantern and Green Arrow. And again, I guess that he got into a little political areas as well with some of that work, specifically the work that talked about social issues in Green Lantern and Green Arrow. So that certainly sounds like something that would be very, very rewarding to see.
Yeah, all the work that he did with Neil Adams.
Yep, exactly. So that was interesting. Finally, I didn't really put too much on from Sunday yet. Like I said, I still needed to go over it a second time, but there was one more Saturday panel that I'd considered, which is Tarzan, John Carter, Victory Harbin, and the Edgar Rice Burroughs universe, which I thought was interesting. I'm interested in history of comic books and fantasy literature and sci-fi and horror, and so I'm very interested in the originals, the first. How things these myths and legends get built into the characters we have today. A lot of that, so much of that is taken from characters and stories that were, the foundation of these genre fiction stories. Like, so much of early superheroes was really informed by Superman, and some of these pre-comic book heroes like Doc Savage and the Shadow and Tarzan and the Green Hornet really had a big impact on the next generation of creators, and you can feel and see their DNA throughout that. So I still have a strong interest in some of these old characters. Like, for example, if you talk about Tarzan, in that genre would be Alan Quatermain, who Alan Moore revived for the first League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, or several of them actually. And so, I'm really interested in some of those the thematic underpinnings from the historical element. So that one, I'm not, it's not on. It might not make it to the short list, but it was something that just in general I was kind of interested in.
Cool. That
wraps it up for me for the panels I picked out.
Alrighty. I must have saved like at least 82 panels to my schedule. So
right.
So I won't go through all of them, but I'll highlight a few of them that you haven't covered yet. First off the bat, the teaching and learning with comics. It features somebody who's going to be on a lot of panels this year. David Walker. I think
he's on a bunch.
Yeah,
that's his name a lot.
And any panel with him on there, and then also, Brian Michael Bendis will be on this panel too. I thought this would be a good way to start off the con by, trying to gain some insight from these two and also the other panelists. On Thursday, this panel is listed for Wednesday, but on Thursday, you got the Building a Geek Brand, Surviving a Pandemic. This is hosted by our good friend Tony B. Kim. I've been attending this panel, well, not this panel per se, but other panels like it for the past few years that he's hosted. And he always brings the thunder, and it's a good way to sort of address, if anybody's out there who wants to sort of go forward with their own geek brand, I suggest that they check out this panel, because Tony B. Kim does it from experience as the founder of Hero Within, and also before that, he was pretty prolific as a blogger. So he knows what it takes to build your own geek brand. So I recommend that panel.
Interesting. What was that one called again?
It's called Building a Geek Brand, Surviving a Pandemic. So
Thursday.
Cool.
Thursday.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'll look for that when next time I go through the schedule to fine tune my stuff.
Mm-hmm. And we don't. It's sort of ironic. We're HallH.com, but we seldom attend any panels at Hall H, right? So now that this sort of Comic-Con at home is in play, all the panels are going to be virtual. I mean, we can sort of attend panels that are sort of Hall H, right? So this next panel, Star Trek Universe, the virtual panel, looks.
Do you kind of mean like without having to deal with that line crap and all the tickets and stuff? Right, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So normally we don't even review Hall H panels because we're more interested in the smaller panels. But seeing as how we can attend any panel, the Star Trek Universe virtual panel is definitely a Hall H level panel. Just looking at they're going to be discussing Star Trek Discovery. They're going to have, it looks like all the major cast members are scheduled to appear. They're going to be talking with the cast from Star Trek Picard, and also they're going to be talking about the new show, Star Trek Lower Decks, which I guess since you're a fan of Rick and Morty, you might like this show because I think they share a lot of they share a lot of sensibilities.
Yeah, I'm optimistic. I saw the trailer. I watched the trailer. It just came out like a week or two ago, and I had vaguely heard that the show was coming up, but I hadn't checked it out yet, or really looked into it, I should say. So when the trailer came out, I did check it out, and as I was watching it, I thought of that exactly. I'm like, oh my God, this is this is perfect. They could really do a lot with this, just like a lot of stuff that Rick and Morty does, as far as really playing with some of the sci-fi tropes and themes that so many of us are familiar with. I really hope that that they hit it out of the park, and it has really tight scripts that do that, because it's possibly could be just really more of a sitcom in space. There's a lot of times when there's again that genre fusion, comedy, horror, comedy, sci-fi. Sometimes it's more of a setting than really an intrinsic part of the story, but it looks like it has a lot of potential. I'm really excited about it.
Mm-hmm. And the next panel, webcomics, saving the entertainment industry 4 panels at a time. I think it's important because, like another panel that I'll probably showcase later, seeing as how we're stuck at home, any opportunity to share your work online, I think it's important. So a lot of people are starting to gravitate toward the webcomics medium. The next one is Afrofuturism.
Yeah, that's pretty relevant.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
The next one, Afrofuturism and Black Religion, Connecting Imaginations. It features John Jennings. He also talks a lot about similar panels, and he's known for a lot of his adaptive work of the Octavia Butler books. So this should be pretty interesting. And another reason why I sort of want to attend this panel is because I recently was asked to be sort of on the to serve as a sort of advisor to a comic book project. A friend of the show, Mark Nazal, he has a movie that he created called Carmina, and it's based off Filipino folklore. So I kind of find that to be interesting, and I want to sort of start looking into not only Filipino folklore, which I sort of have a limited knowledge of. I want to delve into other mythology as well, because I mean there's other mythology out there besides the Greek and Roman gods that I grew up with.
Right.
Next is
that sounds really, really cool. I love exploring other cultures' folklore, because there's so many interesting, that's where you get a lot of cool like monster stories, like the like the chupacabra or whatever. Yeah, we have Bigfoot or whatever, stuff like that. But historical stories. I was just doing some. I apologize, is a little bit of a tangent, but I'll keep it short. I was just doing some research on one of those instances for a story I was going to call, one of the greatest story tropes that you don't know, which is the trope of the doppelganger. I'm sure you guys know what a doppelganger is, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how would you define that? Just give me a one sentence, or just say what it is.
It's pretty much somebody who's your copy, right?
Right. Your double.
Yeah.
Sometimes referred to as like an evil twin in some circumstances or some stories or whatever. Well, that goes. Apparently, I think it goes back at least as far as to this ancient Irish folklore, which was in its original form had more of a ghost type of connection, supernatural ghost. But when you think about it, when like you wouldn't think cloning, because that was at a time before that there would be an idea of what cloning would be. So those types of tropes that would show up in cloning stories in today's sci-fi still have some of the same roots to when it was a supernatural myth back in old Irish times or whatever. And I don't recall that off the top of my head, so it may have gone into other cultures as well. But I found that interesting and fascinating, and how it informs some of the most common sci-fi tropes in today's stories or whatever. So when I that's what I meant by like finding new monsters and stuff like that or whatever. You find these new tales that are of heroes or monsters or whatever that are so fascinating. And so I'd love to, it's interesting to then go into a culture like Filipino culture that I don't know that well, and see what their stories that are kind of in these genres are like, and what kind of the characters are. So that sounds interesting.
And not to mention that there's several thousand islands in the Philippines. So I'm sure different regions have their own versions of different mythologies, so that'd be interesting.
Definitely.
That'd be interesting to delve into. So, and in recent years, I think tabletop gaming has sort of become popular. So I think the prototype
totally it has.
Yeah. I think the prototype and game pitches, publishing your tabletop game, is a pretty interesting panel to check out. I don't play a lot of table games myself, but the few times where I've had the chance to participate, they've all been fun, and I can see the appeal.
Yeah, I don't play them much now either, and of course, right now it's probably difficult because that's a social type of game that you know
Mm-hmm.
people aren't doing as much at the very moment. But I agree that it's an interest of mine, going back to especially if you grew up in the 70s, 80s, or 90s, playing those types of games was such a common part of your childhood, and Dungeons and Dragons was such a, even though I didn't play it a ton partially because it was just a very difficult game to play, but me and my buddies, we were big into it, and of course it really fed our interest in that genre of storytelling. That was really for a generation, that was our introduction into Tolkien type of material, and so I find that whole format of gaming, and of course, then we launched into from Dungeons and Dragons into Champions, which was a superhero version, and there was another one, I think it might have been called Star Frontiers or something. It was sci-fi, a lot of different versions that suddenly are once you're familiar with the type of gameplay, then you're finding other new versions or whatever. Very, very fascinating stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it reminds me of that time you brought me to your friend's house in Orange County.
Oh yeah,
and he has
Jason.
Game night like every
not
week.
You, Jason, but another Jason. my good friend Jason Colston. He's big on tabletop games. They have a big collection. I mean, it's
like 2 bookshelves full of of various games.
Yeah, that was a fun night. I think we played like some sort of like a werewolf game.
Yeah,
where like everybody played a role in the village. So the object of the game was to find the werewolves and kill them. But
nice.
Obviously you don't know who they are, so you have to figure it out.
It's
so
kind of a mystery thing.
Yeah, so that was pretty fun.
Yeah.
I mentioned David Walker earlier, and this next panel, History Goes Graphic, I find pretty interesting because, I one day myself want to create some sort of sequential art, some sort of comic book or maybe a graphic novel. So, how does one adapt real life into a comic format? So I've always wondered that, and I think this panel, History Goes Graphic, features also Fred Van Lente, Tom Scioli, Mickey Kendall, Malaka Garab, and I think it's moderated by Caitlin Ketchum. So this panel, like I said, features David Walker. He's done some work in the past. I think one based off of Frederick Douglass, and I think he's preparing to do one, an adaptation on the Black Panthers. So this would be an interesting panel to check out.
Yeah, that does sound interesting. That reminds me, just a little quick personal anecdote. John Lewis just passed away.
Correct. Yeah.
Just before recording this, obviously, and that reminded me of the time I met John Lewis at Comic-Con.
Oh yeah, from March.
Yep. And 2016 that was, and that was kind of a very cool moment, and I was thinking about actually telling that story on the channel. So and of course he was there because of that comic that he did, and that told the history of his work in civil rights with Dr. Martin Luther King, and fascinating stuff. So comic history is just a very cool genre, and there's so much there to find out.
Yeah, rest in peace, John Lewis.
Yes.
Also,
American hero. He's a true American hero.
Definitely. And just before I move on, there's pictures floating around of when he came to Comic-Con, and he actually cosplayed as he was when he marched back in the 60s. So he's wearing he's wearing the same like beige trench coat and like a similar trench coat, obviously, but and the tie and the backpack. And so they show comparison pictures, and it's basically what he wore during during one of the marches.
Wow, that's crazy.
Well, what day was that history one?
It's Friday.
Friday.
Yeah. 12 p.m.
Okay, cool.
And then the next panel, one of my most favorite pictures that I ever took at Comic-Con was during a panel that featured Neil deGrasse Tyson and Brandon Braga, and it's a really funny picture of Neil deGrasse Tyson's pretty animated when he talks, so he's caught in this pose, so he's like really emoting basically. So it was a really cool picture. I think I shared it one time, and I think he liked it, so that was pretty cool. But anyways, Cosmos is back with Cosmos Possible Worlds. This will be a new season coming out, so any chance to have science in a science fiction setting is welcomed. And I've enjoyed so far the seasons that I've watched of Cosmos, and I recommend it to anybody out there. I mentioned.
Yeah, he's always great.
Yeah,
he's always great.
I mentioned that Anne Jurian's going to be part of this project again, and she's the wife of Carl Sagan. So that is going to be a fun panel, and I think Seth MacFarlane's a producer, and I think he'll be on the panel as well. So this should be a fun one.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
One of the panels that I want to showcase next features a friend of the show, Barbara Dillon from Fanbase Press. I was recently on her podcast with her husband, Bryant, Fanbase Weekly. That was a fun chat. And they're going to be on this panel. Barbara is. I think she'll be moderating. And it's called Giving a Voice to Independent Creators. And seeing as how, that's what Hall H does, we're all in full support of this panel. And she's going to be talking to Lisa K. Weber. She's the artist of Hex 11. Kelly Sue Milano, writer from Hex 11. And Lindley Forrest, she's the editor of Hex 11. And I've seen the Hex 11 team on panels before, and they're really good on panels, so I'm sure this panel is going to be great. Not to mention David Walker again is going to be on the panel. And our friend Travis Rivas from Accidental Aliens, and he also spearheaded an anthology called Super Abled Comics. It's going to be on this panel, so giving a voice to independent creators, that should be fun. That's 11 o'clock Saturday. And then diversity in comics, why inclusion and visibility matters. John Jennings is going to be on the show. David Walker again. So any panel with these two again, it's going to be a good one, and I'm sure you'll learn a lot from watching this panel. Moving on along. Comixology Originals, creator-owned comics and beyond. I'm curious to see what Comixology has to say, specifically about creator-owned comics, because now that comics is sort of going through a phase of some sorts. It's not just about the big two. There's a lot, or three if you want to count Image, but I think Image is still sort of more independent. Still, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always interested about creator-owned comics, so I want to see what these guys have to say. One of the panels that me and Alex like to go to at Comic-Con is the Cartoon Voices, which is moderated by Mark Evanier, and I think it's always a fun way to spend the time, especially when you're at the con, because it's like a really nice room that it's a big enough room where they let enough people in, and so you can just chill out and just listen to these cool voice actors just sort of what they'll do is they'll sort of recite a script, but using like cartoon voices. So it's really fun, and it's a good break from the craziness of Comic-Con to just check it out. We've also been to a panel featuring DMC from Run DMC. I think it was at Kamikaze back in the day, which is now LA Comic-Con. Mm-hmm. But DMC is, for those of you out there who don't know, he's a really big fan of comic books, and he's had his own comic book come out. So it'd be interesting to see what he's working on today. So it's called Out of This World with DMC. Daryl Makes Comics and Friends. So I'm looking forward to that one. And then moving to Sunday, there's a celebrating 80 years of Will Eisner's The Spirit. To be honest, like, I don't know a lot about The Spirit. I've only recently started looking into it. So, and I know that The Spirit is a huge influence on a lot of the comic book creators that we know and love today. So I want to check out this panel.
Yeah, that's some good stuff. Eisner, I can't say I'm super knowledgeable as far as having read a ton of it. I do have some Spirit comics. I think the stuff I have may not, I don't know if he worked on it or he collaborated on it, but it was like, I think some DC Spirit comics that came out in like the 90s maybe or something like that. But also just am aware more of him historically and some of the impact that he brought to comic books. I mean, it definitely, some of the art techniques is just, I mean, in that respect, he's legendary. But Spirit's also a pretty cool property. Obviously, I don't know, you probably remember the movie. It doesn't quite live up to the Eisner name, but definitely a very cool character.
I know they made more than one movie in the past, right?
Did they? Oh, you know what? I think you're right. Didn't they? They also made one like in the 80s or 90s with the guy that was
Sam
Flash
Jones,
Gordon, right?
Sam Jones.
Sam Jones. I forgot about that.
I never saw that one, but I just happened to sort of read about it when I guess in an article that was talking about the most recent Spirit.
Yeah, I haven't seen it either, but I have seen some clips on YouTube, and it's definitely something that I wanted to check out. Even though it might be just a little kitschy, but still, it sounded interesting. Mm-hmm.
And I think it's available on DC Universe. So if you're subscribed to DC Universe, you can check it out.
Oh, very cool.
Check out this. If I were to read this, would you be interested in going to this panel? Let's see. Not all female artist creators are about unicorns and glittery vampires and silly pseudo bondage. So I saw that and that made me chuckle. But it's the women.
That definitely piques my curiosity.
Yeah. So it's the Women on the Dark Side panel. So basically, they're going to talk about dark and challenging art content, basically from the lens of the female perspective, and it's moderated by Barbara Dillon once again from Fanbase Press. So this looks interesting. And it's something that's a little bit out of the norm. So this sort of caught my eye. So I don't know about you, Jason, but I think both me and Alex grew up watching Robotech.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, awesome. Well,
it was a hard show. I didn't watch it a ton because at that time I seem to recall that it was hard to, I think, find the show because I think Voltron was a little bit bigger, and so they put that into like more like afternoon slots, whereas like Robotech in my market was like early in the mornings or something like that. So I didn't catch it all that often, but every time I did, I was like, oh, the station stayed right there, and I was glued to it. Loved it.
Yeah, well, I know. There's gonna be a Robotech the next phase panel, and I know that Harmony Gold gets a lot of flack for a lot of things, but I still enjoy Robotech, and I always want them to sort of succeed in whatever they're trying to do.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to see what they have to say. I know they each panel I go to, they talk about future projects that never seem to come to fruition. But I'm hopeful that they come up with something concrete and something that we can enjoy, hopefully soon. Let's see. The next panel, it's supernatural therapy, fighting internal monsters like a hunter in real life. I think sort of thinking about how psychology fits into pop culture, I think is something that you don't really necessarily think about, but I think it's important. And it features a psychologist that we're sort of familiar with, Dr. Janina Scarlet. She's the author of Supernatural Therapy, and a friend of the show, Vince Avendia, is an artist on one of her other books. So I think this panel looks pretty interesting because I want to sort of, get the perspective from a psychology sort of frame of mind.
Interesting.
Yeah, Billy San Juan. We went to one of his panels at WonderCon one year. I forgot what the topic was, but
that's right. Billy San Juan is on this panel.
Yeah, he's from San Diego.
That's right. Cool. All right. And the last panel, which I had alluded to, saying that maybe some of the panels might be live. I'm thinking this might be one of the live panel, but I'm not sure. But the only reason I say that is because the person that's moderating this panel, I mean, it's hard not to think of him in a live environment because he's so animated and he interacts with the audience so well. I'm talking about the panel that's called "The Grind Never Stops, Not Even During Quarantine." Brian Tillman, his nickname is Kaiser. He usually does a how to pitch and promote yourself panel at San Diego Comic-Con. And even though I've been to it numerous times, I still go to it just because going to it invigorates me and sort of like awakens the creative spirit. And so he's always fun to watch and to learn from. So I encourage one out there who's sort of wondering what it takes to get ahead with your projects or how to stay motivated, check out this panel. And that's it. So is there any other panels that you guys want to talk about, or are we good to go?
There's so many good ones that
I know.
It's like every year is like you always choose like 100 panels, but only go to like 20 of them, even not even that probably.
I know, and I think that's the beauty of this year is that we're able to check out pretty much any panel that we want to without any chance of them overlapping.
I didn't need to cover anything else on the panels, but there was one more comment I did want to make on one of the panels that I had mentioned on my list, which was queer or horror is queer. We were talking about the Nightmare on Elm Street. I forgot to mention it when I was telling you, but our friend Andy Mangles, you know Andy Mangles, right?
I'm not sure.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you did. Maybe I was just confusing because I know Matt Dunford does, but Andy Mangles is a guy I look up to quite a bit because he did a column in Hero Illustrated magazine called Hollywood Heroes, where he covered comic book and sci-fi adaptations into movie and TV and stuff. And that was right at the time when I was in college studying film and TV and just starting to do my own criticism of comics, cartoons, and movies, and had a big impact on me there. But he's done a lot more than that. He's written a lot of comic books and movies, or I'm sorry, not movies, but novels. He's done a lot of stuff on Star Trek. Most recently, he did a crossover for DC, which was Wonder Woman versus the Bionic Woman. And so he's a really great guy, super knowledgeable, has done a lot of documentary work on these genres, and he's a gay man. And, it's funny because he would cover gay material in his Hollywood Heroes column. And, at the time I didn't know he was a gay man, but now he's, an out. I'm not even saying he wasn't out back then. It's just he didn't, announce it in the column or anything like that. But anyways, I met him in 2001 and did an interview with him and have kept in touch with him. It's usually anytime I see him at a con, I always try to say hi because he comes to every Comic-Con or whatever. And he had recently been commenting on Facebook posts about that, the whole Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 thing. And obviously he's got quite an insight, not just because he's a gay man, but because of his, historical and documentary work on genre, film, and comic history and such. So, sorry, I just brought that up because I thought, mistakenly, I thought you guys knew each other. But anyways, if you see him at Comic-Con when it comes back in person, definitely introduce yourself to him because he's a great guy to know. Just a really, really wonderful guy and super knowledgeable.
Cool. Hey, you know who's another person that you know, but I don't know personally?
Who's that?
Dan Wiesenmeyer.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a good segue to sort of talk about some of the exhibitors, artists, and small press people that are going to be at Comic-Con that we think you should check out.
Yeah.
Have you guys had a chance to take a look at the who's going to be appearing?
Well, I wanted to ask you about that. I took a glance. I didn't really put as much together with a list, though I did make note of a couple people that were there. But I was curious how this actually works, just like I was curious about whether there's going to be live streaming with Q&As. How exactly does this work?
Well,
the Artist Alley.
I think on the 22nd or sometime next week, they're going to make available the hall virtually. So I'm curious to see how that's going to work.
So you don't know is really what you're saying, right?
Well, I don't know exactly how it's going to work, but they'll make it available that you can actually interact with the artists online.
Well, that would sound to me like each booth is, well, I mean, you're looking at a diagram with all the booths. Uh-huh. And if you click on, say you click on Dan Wiesenmeyer. Dan Wiesenmeyer is an artist. He does a lot of stuff with I know he's done some Lego Star Wars comic books and such. Mm-hmm. So you click on Dan's booth. I would assume it would either send you to or open up a new window where it would be him streaming. And so it'd be like a Twitch stream where, you suddenly are watching and you can start commenting in the chat or whatever. And that, he would, be talking to the people, looking at the chats, answering questions or something like that. And then if you were sick of that and you wanted to go out and check out another artist, then it would open up another streaming. That, to me, that's, I guess, what that would sound like. Is that
I think so, but yeah. I have a feeling that each artist is going to be responsible for setting up their own streaming platform.
Yeah.
Well, that shouldn't be too hard because, you can do it through Twitch. I mean, there might be a few guys there that might be new to streaming. I mean, there's a few old timers, Facebook
Live.
Pardon?
Facebook Live, YouTube Live.
Oh yeah, I guess Facebook it would be, that'd be even easier for people. That's a lot easier to set up, I would think, than Twitch and StreamYard.
Yeah, some people still do Instagram Live too.
And
okay.
let me just read.
Is that, can you go unlimited on that though? I mean, this would
I don't think so.
Okay, so that probably wouldn't work then.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how it is. I'm curious to see how it is, but just taking what they're saying on the website, I'll quote it directly. It says, on Wednesday, July 22nd, the Comic-Con at Home online exhibit hall will go live. Join us for an interactive version of the floor plan with offerings from a great cross-section of exhibitors from all over the Comic-Con exhibit hall. You'll find company listings, exclusive products for sale, promotional links, and a whole lot more. The exhibit hall will be available for all 5 days of the convention. It will close just like the real thing on Sunday, July 26th. Check it out as soon as you can and as often as you can. And remember, you can't see the whole thing in just one visit. So
interesting. So that sounds like also that's a one-time gig, that once Sunday's over, none of that will be accessible again.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting because that makes me wonder. Now the panels are going to be done through YouTube. Oh, you can stream on YouTube as well. So maybe that's what the Artist Alley people will be doing, because I don't know if you noticed, but on the panel descriptions, there's already links to YouTube, to the actual video on YouTube.
I saw that.
Obviously, it doesn't go to anything. The video doesn't exist yet, or whatever, or it's not live. But so maybe it's through YouTube. But when I was looking originally at the list of Artist Alley, after you had sent out the notes or whatever, that's one of the reasons why I didn't really make too detailed a notes on this one, on this topic, because I didn't understand how it was going to work. But it sounds like that might make more sense, and that might be more of a true con experience where you can. It's live. It's you can ask questions. It's interactive. This might be a little bit more of an interesting part of the experience than I originally thought when I was getting ready for the podcast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we probably don't have to go through the whole list of exhibitors and everybody that's going to be there. I mean, I think our audience can take a look for themselves.
Sure.
But if there's anybody on there that you want to sort of highlight, that you want to promote, then feel free.
Well, for me, it was, it's a lot of time, it's the usual suspects that I try to check out. Marv Wolfman has been pretty present at Artist Alley the last few years. It's not something that he does every year, but the last, I'd say 2 or 3 years, I think he's been at Comic-Con all of those years, and then also Comic Fest, at least this past year. I don't know if he was there the year before. So he's always a guy. I mean, there's so much history. He's done so much. He's one of those guys where it's a little hard to talk to him, at least on my end, because it's like there's so much you could ask him. Where do you even start, So he's just always a great guy to talk to. I've talked to him several times. I interviewed him the first time in 2001. And then that first year that I went with camera crew, and then I've talked to him in subsequent years. But the last 2 years, I've intended on getting interviews with him, and I know at last Comic-Con he'd agreed to one, and then when I tried to connect back up with them, we missed each other or whatever, so it just didn't work out. So he's one guy that I always try to talk to. I saw Larry Houston's going to be there again this year. Definitely makes me super bummed out that it's not in person, because I always try to talk to him and get an interview, some comments on film whenever I can, because he just had such an impact on me, being a legendary creator in 1990s cartoons, specifically Marvel cartoons like X-Men and Fantastic Four. I just love that guy, so it's great to see him again. I saw that Todd Knock is going to be back again, and obviously he's a great artist. I got to interview him last year, and so I thought it might be fun to try and talk to him again and get a few more comments. Obviously that's probably less likely now, but still might check out his booth anyways and throw him a couple questions or something. But those were Elliot S. Magan is another guy that I've saw at 2 years ago, and got an interview with him and have wanted to do a follow-up with him. He's a great guy, again, done so much, but really known for being one of the legendary Superman writers of the last 30 years. Those were the guys that stood out for me. There's a couple more. I think his name is Anson Jew. Oh yeah, Anson or Benton Jew. They're brothers, and they do design work. Well, I think they do a lot of stuff. They do comics, but they're really known for doing design work for movies. They've done some of the MCU movies, some of the design work on those. I always find those guys fascinating. So that's kind of off the top of my head, some of the main guys I was thinking about.
Cool. Alex?
I'm going to put together a list and have a blog post for all the artists, but a few that I've been watching on Twitch lately is teenager Ethan Castillo. He just started streaming some of his artwork and his gaming on Twitch the past couple months, so I've been following him. Ryan Benjamin, I think he's a freelance artist for DC and Marvel, and I think he streams once a week on Twitch. Our friend Lee Cozy, he's on there late at night grinding away on a lot of his fine artwork, and lately he's been working on his comic Kindergoth. So that's pretty cool. But there's a few more that you'll see on our Artist Alley post coming up.
Cool. I'll just mention a few names too, which I'm sure will be added to Alex's blog post.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick Ballesteros, Scott Koblish, he's pretty cool. He's always fun to talk to in person. Ron Lim, David Mack, Don Wynn, he's the creator of Pablo, comic book Pablo. Dustin Wynn, I mentioned Descender and Ascender earlier. He's the artist behind those books. Will Spartasio, Livio Ramondelli, he does a lot of Transformers artwork. Brian Tillman, and somebody that I've always wanted to get to know better and talk to is Chrissy Zulo, but she's always busy. Her booth is always busy. Yeah, her stuff is awesome. So I recommend our listeners to go check out Chrissy Zulo. She does amazing work.
Yeah, even some of her illustrations were turned into actual figures from DC.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, so
cool.
She's real cool.
And just moving on down to small press, Accidental Aliens, Fanbase Press, Hex Comics, Horatora Studios. Christy Shin is the owner of Horatora Studios, and I'll be actually posting my podcast with her after this podcast is posted. And that was a fun conversation. And Just Scope, that's one of Alex's favorite artists. Mora Productions, Omar Mora, he's the creator of the Unearthians. He was a recent guest on the podcast. Wannabe Press is owned by Russell Nolte. And last but not least, White Ash Comics.
White Ash, yeah.
Yeah, he's owned by Charlie Stickney. And if our listeners out there want to check out a comic book, you should definitely check out White Ash. If you love fantasy, the fantasy genre, it's pretty cool. Exhibitors, Action Lab, Andy Park Art, Bill Sienkiewicz, Boom Studios, Bubble Comics. I think they're from Russia, right, Alex?
Yeah, Bubble's from Russia.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. Dark Planet, which is owned by
Stephen Frank.
Yep, Stefan Frank. Hero Within. Make sure you go check out Hero Within. Jungle Boy Productions. Ryan Mienerding. Alex Nido. Nuligan. Southern California Comics, which is they're based out here in San Diego. Go support them. Our good friends at Stranger Comics, Super 7. Hopefully get a chance to interact with TJ Shevlin.
Great guy to talk to.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. That guy's always good to talk to. When you mentioned him earlier, I was gonna say I went to at least 2 or 3 panels that he did at Comic Fest this year.
Mm-hmm. And our good friends at Tino Evil. I think I own at least 5 Tino Evil shirts. So if you're looking for awesome geeky tees, go check out Tino Evil. So yeah, that's pretty much a few of the exhibitors that stand out to me and that I'd probably visit if I was actually at San Diego Comic-Con. I guess as we're nearing the end of this 3-hour podcast, I guess we'll try to do a quick thunder round. And I guess we'll start off with question number 1. What's been your favorite thing to eat during the pandemic? Jason.
I would have to say soy chorizo burritos, homemade soy chorizo burritos.
Interesting.
Because obviously not eating out much. I have gone to, there's a new taco place that opened up near us, Laredo Tacos, which is kind of a little bit nicer than your normal fast food taco place, kind of a little bit Chipotle-ish. But other than that, I've been making stuff myself. And I just have, I shop mainly at this Mexican farmer's market near me, or it's not like a farmer's market like the outdoor where people come, or whatever. It's A Mexican grocery store, but I think it's farmers market is in the name. They call themselves that. Anyways, I found soy chorizo and I was like, oh, awesome. I'm going to try that out. And and so I've been making soy chorizo burritos, and then I get a bunch of veggies from the produce section or whatever. And for me, that's a pretty gourmet meal, especially when I'm looking for, quick and easy food keep me going during the quarantine.
Mm-hmm. Have you tried Chipotle's chorizo?
I might have. I haven't eaten at Chipotle in so long. There used to be one very close to me when I lived in the sports arena area in San Diego, but I haven't eaten there in quite a while, so I'm not 100% sure, but I believe so.
Well, it's pretty good. It's really well seasoned.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Another thing that I've discovered at some of the local taco shops is chorizo breakfast burritos, because I used to be a big bacon, egg, and cheese breakfast burrito guy. And then one day I'm like, I'm not as much of a fan of sausage, so I would never pick that option. But why don't I try the chorizo? That was actually that's how I first tried chorizo years ago, was in a breakfast burrito.
Right. That's always good.
Jason, you know what I recommend?
What's that?
You know how chorizo is kind of greasy?
Yeah. So
I usually get it in a torta version with the Mexican bread. Try it with that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because you know how sometimes
the torta sandwich style is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Does that soak up the oil a little bit more?
Yeah. Because sometimes the tortilla gets too soggy if I just get a chorizo burrito.
Sure.
Doubt that the chorizo torta is, I think, 10 times better.
Well, that's not as much of a drawback when you're home making them, because because most of the tortillas you get are thicker.
Yeah.
However, the last time I was at my local Mexican market, I went to get this, the packaged store-bought tortillas, because they usually have these packs of 24 and they last a long time. So it's like, especially during the pandemic, I try to limit how many times I have to go shopping.
Yeah.
And so I try to get stuff in bulk if I can or whatever. And they were out. Of course, it's not uncommon right now. We're all seeing, shortages of things, not like we were with toilet paper in the beginning of it, but sometimes you go there and stuff's out. For example, the place this Mexican place I go to, they haven't had lunch meat, like a selection of lunch meat. They have like one brand of like ham or whatever, and it's one style that I usually would never get or whatever. But like normally you'd see a wall of the Oscar Mayers and the turkeys and the roast beefs and all the different styles of cold cuts or whatever. They haven't had that since April probably. So just kind of funny, I guess.
Cool. Alex.
Oh, sorry. I meant to say, so they were out of tortillas, and so I'm like, they've got a tortilleria or whatever, however you pronounce that. I'm not sure. Inside the store where they make fresh tortillas, and so like for the first time in a couple of years, I'm like, why don't I get the fresh made stuff or whatever? And those are a little bit thinner, like the ones you might find at a taco shop or something like that, like you're talking about, Alex. So I hear you there.
Yeah. Cool.
Alex.
Lately, one thing I've been ordering is Little Caesars extra most bestest thin crust pizza. For Caesar, lately they've been pretty good. So,
what is an extra most? I know what thin crust is, though. I don't know that I've ever had it from Little Caesars. I assume that's at least somewhat new, or that's not what they call their normal pizza, right? Because they got the square pan style. They got the normal style that's a little bit thinner and round, and I assume this is a real thin crust, though.
Yeah,
right?
It's a thin crust, but with like extra cheese, extra pepperoni. That's the
that's the most asbestos or extra. Gotcha. Okay.
And it runs $6 to $7, so it's not bad for quick. And it's no touch. You just order it on the app, and they put it in a little portal, and you just scan it, and you open it up and take it out. No one touches it. So.
Oh, really? So you still go to the store, but they just have like an automat thing where they're putting it through some box or something like that, or
someone makes it by hand, but after that they put it in like a a shelf or a oven almost, and it's almost like a self-serve. After it's made, they put it in that container, and they call it Pizza Portal, and you just scan your phone, and it opens up your drawer, and you pull out your pizza.
Crazy. Do you know what an automat is?
Automat. Oh.
An automat is something from like the 60s and 70s.
It used to be big in New York, right?
Yeah. And
it's like a vending machines almost?
Exactly like a vending machine, except it's not a machine. It's the front of it is like a vending machine, but it's super big. It's like not the size of a machine. It's like, maybe 10 feet wide and 4 feet tall, starting at waist up or whatever. And it's a series of windows. And you would, on the other side, all the portals, like you're saying, these were there'd be windows. You'd open up the window and grab a sandwich out of it. On the other side, it was also open, and there'd be a staff person putting in fresh-made sandwiches or macaroni and cheese or whatever each dish was in each different window. And you just look at each window and see what is interesting and put in coins and open it up. And of course, that died out in, by the 80s, probably died out in the 70s. I remember knowing about them, and I think maybe seeing them. I don't know that I probably did eat in, from one, like, a couple times when I was like, 7 or 10 years old or something like that. But it's crazy. So that's died out, and it's basically exactly what you're describing, but just with, credit card scan, or is that what you said you do? You scan your card and then open up the window?
Just, their app, their Little Caesars app.
So how does it know which you go there? Is there multiple to choose from, or how does that work exactly?
Yeah, it's almost like a bookshelf almost, but with little.
And there's multiple boxes divided off, and each one has a different pizza. You scan which one you want, and the door opens up.
It'll automatically open your correct one.
I think it's basically like an Amazon locker. You
Amazon locker.
You order your food, and then
okay.
Yeah.
I just saw one of those, I think maybe for the first time. I'd never really noticed them. I saw one outside of 7-Eleven I stopped at the other day. And it sounds exactly like an automat, except, it's for something you pre-ordered. And so there's no window, there's just a door like a locker. And, but this, it's funny because this is the same technology, basics of technology as automat. And it's coming back in Amazon. It came back to solve the issue of, I assume, delivery. I assume that's for like what higher value items that you don't want to leave on your doorstep or something. Is
anything?
Just if you're concerned about it being stolen, you can have it directed to that. Okay, very cool. Yeah. But in this case, it's like it's like a response to the pandemic. We're reaching into the past and using old technology.
I swore like maybe 10, 15 years ago, I thought someone tried to bring back the automat.
Oh, really?
I forgot what city it was, but I guess it wasn't that successful. But it might work now. Who knows?
I might look into this. This sounds like an interesting topic for a video. And I might actually go out to Little Caesars and check that out and see if the ones near me have that. And if they do, go check that out, get some footage and try it out and see what you're talking about. Make sure, see for myself. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah. That's one I recommend, the extra most thin crust.
That's funny that I didn't even know that they had thin crust, but I remember plenty of times back in the old days getting those square pan pizzas.
Oh yeah, in the paper sleeve.
Yeah,
you get two of them.
Were they the hot and readies, or the hot and readies were the round ones?
I think the hot and readies are round. I don't know.
Gotcha. Because I remember my old roommate was often, it's like we'd be at the bar and he'd say, "All right, I'm heading home." Up, and heading home for him was stopping at Little Caesars to pick up a hot and ready.
Cool. Let's see. Oh, me. I've been putting Tabasco green pepper sauce on almost everything. So
interesting.
I think that's been my favorite thing. It's I don't know if you've had it, but it's not like regular Tabasco sauce. It's a little bit more. It's zestier. And I think it's more. I don't know. I just like the taste better.
It's interesting. I think I don't know that I've ever really tried it. Partially, probably because just the color. I didn't know what to expect, and so I would, if Tabasco was what the restaurant had, I would just use the traditional red Tabasco, but
it's nothing like that Tabasco. It's way different, and I think for me it's way better.
Well, that sounds appealing to me because I typically would rather have more flavor and less heat, and that Tabasco is pretty hot, so it's like if you put a little too much on there, it can be it can make it actually difficult to eat because you're like coughing because of the fumes and coughing up food almost.
Right.
What was the name of the Tabasco flavor?
It's a green pepper sauce.
Green pepper sauce.
Yeah.
Huh.
I'll have to check that out too. I always love trying new sauces.
I guess if you're a fan of like tomatillo sauce, you might like this.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Next question. We talked about panels earlier. If you were asked to create a panel for this year's Comic-Con at Home, what would your panel be about, and who would be your panelists?
Well, I've always wanted to do a panel on classic action cartoons, and talk about some of the interesting historical tidbits, especially that's off the beaten path. Stuff from the earliest days of cartoons, stuff from the 60s, 70s, and in 80s, probably, up to about the end of the Super Friends reign. I think once in like 1983 was a sea change for the industry, and that's when He-Man came out. G.I. Joe was in full swing. The whole format of how comics were delivered to people changed, and like that classic quote from Marshall McLuhan goes, "The medium is the message." And when the medium changed, then it changed the content as well. And by medium, I mean we went from typical Saturday morning cartoons, which was, has a certain hierarchy set up for how these cartoons get made and get produced and get greenlit, which was through a very intrusive, oppressive system through the TV networks, very high on censorship, always trying to dumb stuff down, and a lot of creative challenges that made it difficult to produce good material. And then in 1983, we really saw the rise of what they call first run syndication, where it was syndicated out to local TV affiliates directly rather than coming through the networks, so that they could use it for filler time whenever they wanted. And that's when you saw a lot of these pop up as weekday afternoon cartoons like G.I. Joe and He-Man. And because of the recent regulation change under the Reagan administration, they could now be more directly tied to promotional products, like being adaptations of toys, which were in effect commercials to help sell the toys. So all these factors really changed the animation industry. And so it's that really pre-84 history of action cartoons, I think, is an area that hasn't really fully been explored and delved into. There's a little bit for some of the most bright spots. There's been a little bit of work on the classic early Spider-Man cartoon, Does Whatever a Spider Can, the 60s show, and some of the DC properties that were introduced in the 60s under Filmation, and then in the 70s under Hanna-Barbera cartoons. But aside from some of those, bigger name properties, a lot of that has kind of is still pretty vague and obscure to most people. And so that's one topic that I've always thought would make a great panel. And for the people involved in the panel, that'd be a little bit trickier. I'd try to get anyone that I could that would still be from that era, though that's probably, for the earliest stuff, probably a little bit difficult. But like for, in lieu of that, modern people that could comment on that, one of them would definitely be Larry Houston. Larry, who we mentioned earlier, he was the director and producer on X-Men and the 1995 season of Fantastic Four, and did a lot of other stuff, Jackie Chan Adventures, and has done other cartoons as well. He's a really knowledgeable animation history guy. He really was the man that brought anime techniques and sensibilities to American TV shows. There was there were shows that were animated overseas, but they were always animated to be American shows using traditional American techniques. Whereas X-Men, he was a real big fan. Larry Houston was a really big fan of anime and Miyazaki, and studied that material and actually made his staff study that material. And they brought a lot of those animation techniques into the X-Men show. Stuff that had really never been seen on American TV before. So I think he has a sense of history that would definitely be a guy I would want to have on there. I think Andy Mangels, who I mentioned earlier, would also be big on that. He is an expert on old superhero material, superhero cartoons. I've read a lot of his work on Filmation cartoons. He actually wrote the book Animation by Filmation, I think, the story of Lou Scheimer. I'm not 100% sure of that title. I should have that book ready to quote, because to give him a plug, it's a great book. So he actually has a lot of deep knowledge into a lot of these obscure cartoons from the 60s and 70s. So he'd be one of the guys I'd want there as well. And I'd have to probably still work on the list of other panelists that I would need to, and it might even be, it's such a broad topic, I probably have to focus it down more to some specific shows. Like for example, there's just random stuff, like in the mid 70s there was a Planet of the Apes cartoon. I don't know, have you guys ever heard of that or seen that?
The cartoon?
I remember watching a couple.
Pardon?
I think I remember watching it a couple of times.
Yeah, I don't know what your thoughts were of that. It's kind of known for being a very slow and dull show. It's very much like a kind of almost written like a very traditional 70s drama, where there's a lot of talking and stuff. It was low budget. It was at a period, it came out in the mid 70s, which is probably the worst period ever since the beginning of action cartoons in the mid 60s. If that was probably the worst time, was like 1973 to 75 or so. So it was low budget, and they had a lot of challenges there, but it was a fascinating entry. First of all, to get more Planet of the Apes material, that was something that kids in the 70s were jazzed for. And I was jazzed for it when I found out about the show, which was probably not until the 1990s or the 2000s. I'm like, oh my God, I've gone through all the Planet of the Apes movies and I heard about the TV show, and now there's a cartoon. That was pretty cool to discover. There wasn't, drama on the time, or on cartoons of the time. In that year period, there was just a dearth of those types of cartoons. So panelists might have to focus on some of those specific little nuggets like Planet of the Apes and cater my panel to that. But that kind of gives you the gist of what I would cover there.
Cool, Alex.
I think we talked about this before, but I always want to do a Filipino panel. I think it was titled something like Past, Present, and Future of Filipinos in Comics, and it would be like one of the last surviving comic artists from the 70s is Alex Nino. I like to have him on there. Better known Filipinos in the comic industry, Wills Portacio, not the most famous one, and maybe some other lesser known Filipino artists like Lionel Yu. Is that a pronunciation?
Oh yeah, sure. Lionel Francis Yu, isn't his middle name Francis, I think, or no?
Yeah. So and just talk about the influence of Filipinos artists in the 70s and what it's like to be in the industry. So
yeah, that sounds cool.
Yeah.
Hey, a little bit before you continue, Alex, can I just quickly say I forgot to right before I turned it over to you. Correct myself. Animation by Filmation is a book, and I have that book too. It's a really good book. But Andy Mangels' book is Lou Scheimer, Creating the Filmation Generation. And I mean, they're both great, but Mangels' book, he worked directly with Lou Scheimer, and this was I think it came out in 2012, and it was just came out a few years before Lou passed away, and so he got a lot of real direct, deep information. Again, both books are fantastic, but Andy Mangels's book had a lot of info directly from Lou Scheimer, from his archives of art and documentation and such. Just a fascinating book. And so I apologize for interrupting you. I just felt so bad that I didn't get his book title right. I wanted to, once I remembered it, I wanted to make sure I plugged it.
Yeah, that was about it for me. So
I would love that panel. That sounds great. I know that we've all three of us have talked about Filipino art in comic book history before, and it's definitely a great subject that is just ripe to mine. There's so much there to cover, I think, that really hasn't gotten too much coverage previously.
Mm-hmm.
I also wanted to do something similar to what Alex wanted to do, but I had a feeling he was going to say that, so...
You planned ahead. Good for you.
So I have actually two things I kind of wanted to either talk about. One of them is graphic design on comic books. I know Arlen Schumer's done presentations about it, so I think he'd be a good panelist. Also, one of the judges for this year's Eisner Awards, Michael Dooley, he's a graphic designer also, and Chip Kidd might be a good choice too. But I think
I love Chip Kidd. He's awesome.
Yeah, I think the graphic design of comic books is a topic that doesn't get talked about as often as it should be. So
right.
I think that's important. And another thing that I kind of wanted to maybe try to create a panel on is I guess the intersection of food and pop culture and comic books, basically. I know, Anthony Bourdain was pretty prolific as a writer, and he also created a few graphic novels. So, and I'm sure there's other instances where food sort of has is part of the story. So, I kind of want to maybe delve into that a little bit deeper. And I'm not sure exactly who would be on that panel, but I think that's definitely worth investigating.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. Again, I love it when just weird, strange elements of life and culture intersect with, this medium that we love so much, comics. That's very cool.
Mm-hmm. The next question, if you could get a commissioned piece from Bill Sienkiewicz, what would you ask him to create?
Good one. I don't know. For me, maybe something offbeat, maybe like a Voltron or Robotech. See how his interpretation of that would be.
Interesting. Do you know that early in his career, one of his earliest works, I believe, was he did covers for the Transformers limited series, which was the first comic book appearance of Transformers, which ended up leading into a regular Transformers series, which lasted for quite some time. I think at least 30 to 50 issues or something. It was a pretty popular comic book. And at the time it came out, me and all my friends collected Transformers, and we were blown away by the fact that there were Transformers comic books coming out. And it was funny because that was my first exposure, unbeknownst to me, to Bill Sienkiewicz, and his style of art is so radically different and more abstract, I guess. Or I'm not an art expert, but it was actually a little bit jarring to experience it. It was weird. It was strange. In fact, I kind of remember thinking to myself, why are the covers so weird? Because did
you do Transformers #1?
Of the limited series,
Optimus,
I collected all 4 of those issues.
Optimus Prime.
Yeah, he's on the cover of #1, right?
Speaking of Optimus, speaking of Optimus Prime, do you know who came up with that name?
Oh, I do, and I'm forgetting. Is it? Let me take a stab. Is that okay?
Sure.
I'll take a guess. Is it Buds Dixon?
No.
No, it's not. It's not. Okay. Yeah.
What? It's somebody we mentioned earlier in this podcast.
Oh, I know that I'm going to kick myself when you say it because I remember just coming across this not too long ago. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to come up with it unless Alex has a guess.
Yeah.
It was Denny O'Neil.
Oh, that's right. And that's why I just covered it, was because it was probably in something that was a write-up of his since his passing. That's right. And so what that means basically is that they hadn't developed the name yet for the toy line, and that when they started the comic book, this is what I'm surmising anyways, so that when they started the comic book up to come out, in conjunction with the toy line, that's when they started having to plot more stuff out. And I'm assuming that they didn't have, the names, or at least all of them yet. And so to get going on the comic book, they started coming up with, because I know they came up with, a chunk of the mythology that we now accept as the Transformers canon, as did, of course, the cartoon as well. But that's I assume that happened. That's pretty fascinating. And a very interesting, melding and mixture of one medium and another medium, the toy medium to the comic book medium. It kind of in a way similar to how, comics are adapted into cartoons, and then they create Harley Quinn, for example, in the cartoon, and then that goes back into the comics. How
right. That's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah. Interesting. He did so much. That's crazy. That's just another little feather in the cap of the history of Dennis O'Neil. A true great.
Definitely. Let's see. Oh, for me, I'm like, I was on Alex's wavelength. I kind of want to see something that I've never seen him do before. I don't think I've ever seen him do a Godzilla, so I kind of want to see that.
I think that was one of my other ones too, but I totally forgot until you mentioned it right now.
That does sound very cool.
Yeah,
I'd probably go opposite of you guys. Go with someone that he did have some experience with, and I would probably even, you might say this is an easy one to pick, but get a Moon Knight, because that's where he really got his start on superhero comics at Marvel, doing a monthly, and I don't know how long he stayed with the series, but it definitely was a key point for him getting his career going. And Moon Knight is a character that I've loved over the years. When I started collecting comic books, his second ongoing series came out, or maybe it was a mini series. It might have been a mini series. And then when I went back into collecting comic books in the 90s, his ongoing series, second ongoing series started. And so those three series, the Sienkiewicz work was before I got into comics. Then they had the 80s reboot when I started collecting comic books. And then when I got back into it in the 90s, he had another ongoing, and I got into that too. So I love the character, and he's a kind of an important part of the character's history, having worked on that first ongoing monthly. And that would be something that I would really love to have, is some original Sienkiewicz Moon Knight art.
Do you think, I know it's rumored that Keanu Reeves is supposed to play Mark Spector. How do you feel about that?
Interesting. I did see that, and I'm a little bit of mixed thoughts about it. For starters, it's Keanu Reeves, so it has to be awesome. Technically, you have to say that that's going to be awesome, because Keanu Reeves is awesome, and everybody loves Keanu Reeves, and I'm certainly one of them. I'm not saying that in a negative at all. Keanu is just, he's almost like, it's weird. He's at the peak of his career at this point in his career. So he's had this weird comeback, and he's just, everything he touches turns to gold, and he's just been revealed for being such a good guy in his real life lately, and videos that go viral and such. So you'd have to like that. And obviously, you got to say John Wick would be a great guy to be, to play a superhero character. And so I have to say that I think he would be great in it, and it would probably be great. But he's definitely not really what I saw as Mark Spector. I don't know. He wouldn't be my first choice necessarily, but I would love to see Keanu Reeves in the MCU in some fashion. And I know they've been talking with him, and it could be this or it could be something in the movies or who knows. But so if this is the way we've got to do it to get him into the MCU, I'd be all for it. But it's interesting. It's not the style that I thought of, but you know what? That happens. That's what we all thought about Michael Keaton in the first Batman movies, and by the end of the first Batman movie, everybody or most people had pretty much reversed their criticism on that. So it certainly could be great. It's interesting. We were talking earlier about some issues that have to deal with minority issues and such, and I had read a story that indicated that they wanted to cast a Jewish person, a person of Jewish ethnicity or whatever, as that role. And I assumed that had something that related to the character's origins or something, which I'm not as steeped in Moon Knight history to be able to confirm or disconfirm that. But I had heard that was something that they were, talking about, which I thought was just interesting because we are getting into an age where we're, finally getting more diversity in the mainline superhero comic books, specifically with the MCU's work with Black Panther, for example, and Captain Marvel, and of course DC with they've also been bringing a little bit forth more diversity in their books as well too. So I thought that was an interesting thing. I don't know if that means anything or if it was just a rumor that didn't pan out or what. But back to Keanu, I'd have to say I'd be generally positive about it because he's just such a great performer and great persona. He's definitely going to be good. But I don't know. What do you guys think about it?
I'm not too well versed in Moon Knight myself, so I don't know how Mark Spector was. I've read a few issues back in the day, but I don't really have a feel for how the character is. So
yeah, me too.
Well, it depends on what they do because the character's had several different stages of what he is, and because what he is now is a lot different than the early 80s, mid 80s work, or even the 90s work. It's become a lot more psychological. He was kind of like a cross between he was kind of like Batman-ish, in that he was a billionaire. He was very similar, at surface value to Batman. All the trappings, billionaire, the gadgets, dresses up in moon iconography rather than bat iconography. But one thing was he had an element from the Shadow, which obviously was an influence on Batman as well. But something that, and Batman did this a little bit too, but it was a little bit more integrated into the character where he had multiple personalities. So he had his billionaire personality, but then he also had a personality as a criminal that he would switch into that, or not personality, I guess. It was really more identities. And he would switch into a criminal so that he'd be able to, get information from the criminal, from, doing undercover work, basically. And then he had a third persona that he adopted as well. And I forget all the specifics, but anyways, so in modern comics, they've played on that element from the earlier comic books, and they've made it into that they were personalities, and it's become much more of a psychodrama and a psychological complex story where he does have these split personalities and he switches between them. I haven't gotten yet to catching up on these, but I know Warren Ellis did an acclaimed run on that, and then there was the guy that followed him up, who I'm blanking on right now, took it over and definitely, they changed him to, he was just wearing a suit, like an all white suit rather than a mask, but not like the cape or anything like that. And I think he went by a different name, Mr. Knight or something like that. But really fascinating stuff. So it depends a little bit on which, are they going to go full blown, multi-personality type of dissociative personality disorder, I believe is the actual clinical term. And I've heard rumors that is what they're going to do. And that doesn't surprise me because it's more of a in-depth, there's more complexity and depth to that psychology of it, rather as the earlier books were a little bit more straight up superhero books. So they might be looking for something that's a little bit meatier and daring, kind of like how, he's a lower tier character, kind of like how they did with Doom Patrol that we were talking about earlier, where they were, because that was a more minor character, they were able to say, okay, well, with Justice League they need to be a little bit more broad, but for this we can really get weird and get into psychology and characterizations that normally would be a little too risky or too dangerous for more standard fare drama when it's a bigger character with bigger budgets and such.
Mm-hmm. Cool. The next question is, I haven't watched it yet, but Netflix has a show called The Old Guard. It's based off of Greg Rucka's comic by the same name. What comic book would you want to see next adapted by Netflix into a movie or a series?
I think I'd be kind of biased. I'd want like one of my friends' comics, like Keith and Jones, Our Nights. See how that would turn out as a TV show or series.
Yeah, that sounds like a good one. When you mentioned it, Aaron, I was like, I didn't realize that was based off a Greg Rucka book. And as soon as you mentioned that, I was like, oh man, I've seen the ads for this. That's with Charlize Theron, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, I had no idea what that was based off a comic book. I mean, obviously it's a crime story, right? But that didn't surprise me because Rucka does a lot of crime comic books.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm like, I gotta go check that out. But for me, one of the things I thought of that I would love to see is first of all, just in general, I'd love to see some adaptations of Brian K. Vaughan's work. I think he's one of the luminary writers from like the 2000s era moving forward. I don't know how much he did before that. I'm not that familiar with his the complete scope of his career. But, Why the Last Man has been a comic book that's been highly acclaimed and has been rumored to be developed into a film for a long time, and it's never gotten through. And I've always thought, I'm only lightly familiar with the series, but I always thought that the series would probably make a better TV show than comic or than movie. I mean, it's he does fantastic long form storytelling, but the one that I would pick would be a book he did called Ex Machina, and that is a fascinating comic book. It's another genre twister where it's a superhero book, but the twist is that the president is the superhero, and it sounds like a real stupid gimmick when you say it just like that in that simple of a sentence, and not undeservedly so, because there's a history of this story trope. There was a cartoon from the 60s that was called Super President. I mean, it was a really goofy cartoon that it was completely obscure and hardly, largely forgotten today, but just a weird concept. And then, of course, you guys might be familiar with, there was a DC Comics actually had a comic book called The Prez, which like starred like a teenage president or something like that. Are you guys familiar with that series?
No, I've never heard of that one.
No.
Okay, it's from the Bronze Age, so it's like late 70s maybe or early 80s. I remember seeing rando issues of it in the bargain bins when I collected in the mid 80s. So I don't know anything about it, and it didn't appeal to me or whatever, but flash forward to Brian K. Vaughan's version. His version is kick-ass. It's basically, because it's very real worldish. It sounds really goofy, like the earlier examples that I cited. But it's basically about this guy who is exposed to an alien force, and it kind of mutates him or changes him and gives him a power. Very much like the movie Chronicle. You remember that?
It sounds
By
familiar.
Josh. Yeah, with the 3 kids who find some alien artifact in this cave, and all of a sudden it gives them all telekinetic powers, and one of the guys goes crazy.
Huh.
It was directed by Josh Trank, like around 2012, I think it came out, maybe even earlier than that. It was almost like a found footage movie, but it was a superhero movie, and I mean, it was just a crazy movie. I bet if you look up the trailer, you'll remember it, even if you didn't actually see it. You'll remember the trailers. It was very much one of those examples of kind of a real world take on superheroes. You know, it was like the TV show Heroes and the movie Unbreakable. It was kind of like the next evolution of that concept that came out again, probably like maybe a decade ago, maybe not quite that long, sometime in probably the early 2010s. Anyways, in Brian K. Vaughan's version, Ex Machina, it gives him the ability to I think communicate or control machines or technology. And anyways, it's kind of like I said, it's very real world-ish. He's an amazing writer, and so in a way, it's kind of like The West Wing meets Iron Man, but instead of just tech, it's kind of like a little bit of an alien power type of twist on it or whatever. It's just a really, I mean, and the West Wing part of it works just as good as the superheroics part of it. And then on top of that, he starts to develop, larger, issues of kind of like things that we mentioned earlier, issues about, fascism and authority and control, because in this world, even though he's a good guy, it's still there's an element of he uses his powers kind of to get to his position. And so is he manipulate, it delves in some very weighty issues, but it's a very great visual comic. And like I said, any Brian K. Vaughan would be good because it's criminally under adapted into film and cartoons and TV. A lot of great stuff there, but Ex Machina was a personal favorite of mine. And I thought that one would be great.
Cool. For me, it's like Alex said, I'd want to see my friends' projects to be adapted into a show. Some of the people that we've had on the podcast, like Stefan Frank and his graphic novel Silver, David Pepos' Spencer and Locke, even Charlie Stickney's White Ash would all be good candidates for a show. They all have different elements that can appeal to different people, but I think one thing that they all have in common is that they're all well written. And for the last question, it's going to be for the Thunder Round. It's going to be, what's something our listeners would be surprised to find out about you?
Yeah, you floored me with that one. I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to answer with that? I don't know. And maybe this is a cop-out, but one thing that just popped into my head, and I mentioned this just because it's not something most people can actually say, is, on the channel, I do a lot of history of movies and cartoons and comic books, but I also cover video games. I really like the early history of video games. And so a few years back, I went on eBay and I actually bought the first video game console that used cartridges. And it's not an Atari 2600, which a lot of people mistakenly think that it's the Atari. I had an Atari when I was a kid. The family did anyways. But I didn't know it at the time. But the year before Atari came out, Fairchild Semiconductor, a large company that's steeped in the history of, the history of a lot of stuff. I mean, obviously, very much in technology and camera equipment. Fairchild Camera and Instrument was the the parent company of Fairchild Semiconductor, but they did a lot of stuff. There's the Fairchild, a suite of airplanes called Fairchild. So they're a really important, company in 20th century American history, and they actually decided to get into the video game market, and they actually beat Atari to the market. And so they came out with the Fairchild Channel F, which is the first video game console that used cartridges so that you could actually put in a different game, go to the store, buy a different game, go home, take the old one out and put the new one in. Wow. And it wasn't a very successful, console. It wasn't successful. It was an interesting example, which we see a lot in history, where the first guy isn't necessarily the one that hits it out of the park. And Atari's came out just a year later, but had definite improvements to it that made the Fairchild obsolete fairly quickly. And also, Fairchild wasn't a game company. So in those early video games, there was no such thing as third-party games. So all of the first three, or so, all of those second-generation consoles largely relied on their own company to make the games. And only Atari and Intellivision and ColecoVision really had a decent library of third-party games. So Fairchild's game output just couldn't be matched by Atari's, because Atari was already a game company. They'd already had 5 years of arcade game development under their belt, and a lot of their early games were basically ports of those early arcade games. So it was easier for them to get a leg up. But still, with all that said, Fairchild created some of the most unique video games that had come out in the first 3 years of cartridge-based consoles, from like 76 to 79, 80 or whatever. They had some of those. Some of the most interesting games, even though they had a really small library. They only had like 25 games that came out before they gave up on the console. So it's a really obscure little nugget of video game history, and there's only so many games available for it, and it's actually even more technologically limited than the Atari, which might throw you for a loop if you've ever played an Atari. Obviously, that's aged quite a bit compared to what we know as video games today. But I'm still immensely proud of this little weird bit of video game history that I've gotten. I've been able to try out and try these different games and kind of see what it was like with the first console before the Atari.
Well, I did a quick search, and they have more games available. Well, they have more games for that system than I thought they would.
Yeah, and it's got a lot of interesting. I'm planning to get around to doing some documentary work on it for my channel, because there's a lot of interesting first things that it brought to video games, and not just the cartridge. Obviously, the cartridge was a key element, and the cartridges looked like 8-track tapes. It's really an interesting system, and even more interesting was the controller, because the controller was like a pistol grip joystick, with a pistol grip with a joystick on the top, and it was one of the most unique controllers that's ever come out, and certainly was easily one of the most unique in of that era, because most of the controllers of that era in the first few consoles were like the Atari. You had one control, the joystick for movement, and then another control, an action button, and it was very limiting to the games. And Fairchild, came out before them and actually had a controller that had way more functionality, even though it didn't really look like it did. So there's a lot of fascinating little bits of history that Fairchild contributed to, or more importantly, were the first ones that brought that, these new techniques or games to video games. And because the console itself was never a huge success, and thus very obscure today, it's not really known that it had that big impact for people.
Cool. Oh, thanks for sharing. Thanks for sharing that one.
Yeah.
Alex.
Wow. Nothing too exciting. I guess the only thing was that we found out about this a few years back, that I was on was it Floyd Norman's documentary?
That's right.
That's the only thing I could think of.
Do you remember that? Do you remember that story, Jason?
Like B-roll, right? It was just like a cutscene and
no. What are you talking
In
about again?
In Floyd Norman's documentary, My Creative Life, Alex shows up in footage from Comic-Con.
Oh, okay, yeah, I do remember you saying that. I forgot the specifics. It was from Comic-Con, though, huh?
Yeah.
When did it come out?
Like 2015, 16? I don't know.
I think 16, I believe. Yeah.
Because I know that some of the other people we've talked about, he's been at the recently. I know at least the last 2 years, I believe he was at Comic-Con, and of course at the last year he was at Comic Fest. But I'm not sure if I knew that he had been doing Comic-Con regularly that much, so that it would go back to like 2014, I guess you'd have to say, or 2014 or 15 would have been when the footage was taken from, I assume, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's great. Wow, that's a cool little feather in your cap, though.
And I stand corrected. It's called Floyd Norman in Animated Life.
Oh yeah, okay. I think I've heard of that. Yeah, I gotta watch that.
Yeah, it's pretty good. For me, I've never watched The Goonies.
Oh.
You gonna watch the remake first?
There's a remake?
Oh, that would be.
I don't know.
No, there's not. But they've been talking about doing a remake of it, but there's nothing that's come out. I don't even think it's in active production or anything. But that would be sacrilege to me. If there's a classic and they're making a new one, you'd have to go back and watch the classic first.
Of
I
course.
think that's one movie they shouldn't even touch.
Well, Aaron, I'll offer a moment of solidarity with you, because The Goonies is one of the movies that people are always shocked to find out that I haven't seen as well.
Oh wow!
Yeah, which is it's funny because it would have been. It's amazing. That one is one movie where it's almost amazing how I missed that movie. I mean, because you could miss a movie in the theater or whatever, but that movie was so big, and I remember all my friends saw it, and I remember for some reason I didn't go with them. Maybe I was not home or doing something or whatever, or something like that. But that would have been a movie that we all would have gone to together, and I didn't see that. And then it never came up on cable or TV or anything, which is weird, because I saw so many other movies of that era,
right,
like 100 times in repeats and such. But that was the one weird movie. You know what another one is that I did finally see was Poltergeist. I saw that probably, I don't know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, something like that. And I was so disappointed. I was so disappointed, 'cause for frickin' 20 years I'd been hearing about how amazing that was. And it was good. It was good. It's just that, for one thing, it was Spielberg, and it was not as scary as I thought it would be, because a lot of it, especially like at the end, was a little bit more, well lit, and was a little bit more of a typical Spielberg movie, a little bit more E.T. and Close Encounters type of level of scariness than rather than as opposed to a traditional real ghost horror story or whatever. So I was that one. I was like, oh, this is a bummer, dude, because I feel like it's they always say that sometimes if you didn't see it in its time when it came out, when you're at that age, it's not going to be the same or whatever. And so I was a little wistfully bummed that I never did see it with my friends back when we were at that age, and that it didn't have as much impact for me, because I heard that from so many people. They would go on and on about Poltergeist.
That's funny, man.
Though I admit that the one scene where the dad, Craig T. Nelson, is freaking out and he like picks his face off or whatever. Do you remember that? I don't know if you guys saw that.
In the mirror?
Yeah, in the mirror. That's what I thought the movie was going to be like the whole time or whatever, because that was freaky.
Yeah, that was.
It had moments of it, but I thought like in the third act specifically, everything was so well lit, and I think he even used some like early primitive CGI when he was having like the ghost make things move around the room or whatever, which which, certainly was an amazing effect at the time, but, it didn't look, as real. It was all well lit, didn't look, it wasn't as scary as like the tone that I thought would be for that scene. But, it's Spielberg or whatever, so he's a little bit of a lighter. He's not really a horror guy, even though he I guess he dips his toe with Jurassic Park and Jaws. But anyways, so yeah, that's one that got away from me, and that I probably have to live with some shame for having went that long without seeing it. But Goonies, I'm with you, Aaron. Still haven't seen it. Maybe if the new one comes out, we better make a time to get together and we'll watch it together, assuming the corona hasn't has lessened its impact.
Sounds like a plan, brother. But
all right.
Hey, I want to thank you for coming on the show and catching up. It's been a while.
Definitely. Thank you guys so much for the invitation. It's always so great to talk to you. And I love going through all this stuff, whether it's Comic-Con or not, because, I love hearing what the stuff that you guys are covering or are interested in covering, because it always brings some new and interesting stuff to the table that I always feel is a benefit. So at the end of the conversation, it's like you guys have both given me new ideas for stuff, some comic books and some movies that I want to go check out, either that I had heard of and just never seen, or more importantly, stuff that I hadn't heard of before. So I appreciate it, Hall H. Thank you guys so much for the invitation.
You're welcome. Where can people find you online?
Yes, you can find me at youtube.com/HeroJournalism or facebook.com/HeroJournalism. Or if you search, just search for HeroJournalism as all one word. And you can find my YouTube channel where I cover, as said before, the history of comics, video games, movies, and also a lot of Comic-Con coverage. Like I said, I just put out some footage of the Watchmen interactive exhibit from 2019 Comic-Con. And actually, in the quarantine here, since it limits a little bit some of what you can do, I'm kind of like using that opportunity to go back into my archives of footage of previous Comic-Cons and start putting out some more footage of older material I covered that I just haven't put up to the channel yet. So I've got a lot of stuff from Comic-Con 2019 that I'll be putting out in the coming weeks. And then I'm going to keep working back farther into history too, because I've been sporadically recording footage, interviews, and exhibits of Comic-Con going back to 2001. So you can check that stuff out, and a lot more coming up on HeroJournalism, YouTube.com or Facebook.com/HeroJournalism.
Awesome. Looking forward to that. Alex, why don't you close out the show?
All right. Thanks again for listening to the Hall H Show podcast. Thank you to our special guest, Jason, for coming on to our Comic-Con at Home 2020 preview episode. Let's keep our fingers crossed in that we'll safely get together next year for Comic-Con 2021. We love putting the spotlight on independent pop culture and comic book creators. If you have a suggestion for a potential guest, please let us know. If you find this podcast, you can find this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Spotify, and our website, hallh.com. If you believe in our mission to be the voice of independent creators, we would appreciate a rating and a comment on iTunes. Please spread the word on social media using the hashtag HallHShow. Peace, cheers, and be a superhero. Instead of wearing a cape, wear a mask.
Word. Peace out.
Thank you all.